Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I set up the trail camera because of the raccoon problem. That's it, nothing exciting. My neighbor Marcy said she'd seen at least 3 of them climbing over my fence every night, and I kept finding my trash can knocked over in the morning. I bought a cheap motion-triggered camera online, strapped it to the big oak in my backyard, and figured I'd get a week's worth of blurry raccoon photos and maybe a skunk or two. That first night, the weather was weird. Warm for October, but with this heavy, wet feeling in the air, like it was going to storm even though the sky was clear. No wind, no bugs humming, just this thick quiet that made it feel later than it was. I went to bed around 11. Nothing special happened. No noises, no lights, no animals shrieking. I slept pretty deeply, actually. I didn't wake up until my alarm went off. The only strange thing I noticed that morning was that my porch light was off, even though it's on a timer. I checked the switch and it was still set correctly. I figured the bulb died, though I couldn't remember how old it was. It wasn't until after work that I remembered the camera. I expected maybe 20 photos, tops, maybe a raccoon waddling around or a neighborhood cat. Instead, when I plugged the SD card into my laptop, the first thing I saw was that the camera had taken 137 photos in one night. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Empty backyard, one shot of a possum, a couple of leaves close to the lens, my fence glowing in infrared. But then I scrolled down. Every shot between 2 and 2:03 a.m. was totally white. Not overexposed, not washed out by the flash, just white. A completely uniform blank image, like someone had opened Photoshop and filled the canvas with pure white. I thought the camera glitched, so I flipped through them quickly. White, white, white. 90 plus identical white frames. I checked the timestamps. The first white photo was 2:11. The last was 2:03:04. I stared at them long enough that my eyes started to hurt. The camera didn't usually fire more than once every 4 or 5 seconds because of the reset time, but these were spaced 1 to 2 seconds apart. Like something kept triggering it over and over, non-stop. I put the SD card back in the camera and took a test shot in my kitchen. The picture came out fine. I tried shining a flashlight directly into the lens. The result was still a normal photo, a bright flare in a dark frame, but not a blank white image. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I went outside to check the spot. The grass looked normal. The oak tree looked normal. Nothing burned, nothing flattened, no signs that anything had even stepped there. The camera mount was still tight. The settings were the same. I told myself maybe a spider built a web on the lens and the flash reflected off it. But when I ran my thumb over the lens, there was nothing there. No thread, no smudge, nothing sticky. The next night, I reset the camera and put it back in the same place. I woke up once around 1:45 a.m. for no real reason. My house was quiet. Too quiet. I'm used to hearing the fridge or the pipes or something. This time there was nothing. The air felt as heavy as the night before. I eventually drifted off again. When I checked the photos later that day, the same thing had happened. 2:02 to 2:05 a.m. this time. Every picture in that window. Pure white. I didn't like how consistent it was. Same narrow time frame, same type of blank image. And once again, the shots fired much faster than the camera usually allowed. That evening, I tried a little experiment. I went outside at 1:50 a.m. and sat in a chair near the tree. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there with a blanket around my shoulders, listening. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, around 2 exactly, I noticed the air shift. Not wind, just a kind of pressure change, like when a storm rolls in. My ears popped. The tree leaves around me didn't move, the grass didn't sway, but the air felt heavier, thicker, like I was underwater. I didn't hear the camera take a picture. Usually the shutter makes a faint clicking sound. This time, it was silent, or maybe I couldn't hear it through that weird pressure feeling. Then something changed with the light. Not bright, not like a flashlight or car headlights, but the darkness around me got thin. That's the best word I have. The shadows softened. The area around the tree felt washed out, like someone had turned down the contrast on reality. I don't know how else to explain it. It lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then, as quickly as it came on, it stopped. Everything snapped back. The air felt normal. The shadows looked sharp again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The photos the next morning were the same, white from 2 to 2:03 a.m. I tried moving the camera the following night. I strapped it to the fence instead, angled so it pointed toward the house. I wanted to see if the light was coming from outside the yard. That night, I stayed inside, watching from the kitchen window. I kept the room dark so I could see clearly into the yard. Around 2 a.m., the same muted shift happened. The air felt wrong again, thick and quiet. I watched the yard, waiting to see some actual light source or movement. Nothing. No glow, no figure, no animal. Just the same flattened, washed-out quality I'd felt when I'd been outside. The next batch of photos were blank again. I was starting to get nervous. Not panicked, just this persistent sense that something was coming into my yard, or around it, or through it, every night at the same time. Not an animal, not a neighbor's light, something else. On the 5th night, I took a different approach. I set up my old camcorder in the window, aimed at the yard. I left the trail camera on the fence too, figuring I'd compare the footage. At 1:57 a.m., I hit record on the camcorder and let it run. When the air pressure changed, I felt it from inside. My ears popped again. The room dimmed slightly, like a cloud passed in front of the moon, except there was no moon that night. The camcorder didn't pick up any obvious light. The image just got slightly flatter, like someone put a translucent sheet over the lens. The trail camera didn't click. I watched it. I should have heard something. But once again, nothing. The next morning, the SD card had 12 white photos, all between 2 and 2:02 a.m. The camcorder footage showed nothing but a slight haze during those minutes. I thought about telling someone, Marcy, or my brother Daniel, or even posting the photos online, but I knew what it would sound like. I barely understood it myself, and I didn't have anything concrete, just white pictures and some footage where the yard looked a little blurry. I left the camera up for another week. Every single night between 1:58 and 2:05, I got blank frames. The window of time shifted slightly but stayed centered around 2 a.m. On the 9th night, something new happened. I woke up at exactly 2:01 a.m. I didn't hear anything, but my eyes opened like someone had whispered my name. I sat up in bed and felt the pressure change immediately. My ears popped so hard it almost hurt. Then, a faint brightness seeped through my curtains. Not enough to cast shadows, just enough to lighten the room a shade. A soft, uniform glow. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I pulled the curtain back an inch. My backyard was white. Not bright, not glowing. Just white, like it was filled with fog, except the air wasn't moving and nothing swirled. It wasn't fog, it wasn't light. It was this flat, pale presence sitting over everything. The oak, the fence, the grass, all washed in the same blank color. I let the curtain fall back into place. The glow faded. The pressure lifted. My ears popped again, this time back to normal. I didn't check the trail camera until later that afternoon. I already knew what would be there. Pure white from 2 to 2:03. The camera still works. I still have it. I haven't put it up again since that night. I don't think I want to know whether it's still happening, but sometimes around 2 in the morning, I'll wake up for no reason at all, and the house feels heavy, and the air feels still, and I keep my eyes closed because I don't want to see whether the room has gone a shade too bright. I woke up because of the cold on my face. That was the first thing I registered, a thin, sharp draft coming straight across my pillow like someone cracked a door in the dead of winter. I reached out automatically to pull the blankets tighter, but my hand brushed empty air. My window was open. I didn't sit up right away. I just stared at the silhouette of the curtain moving, slow and steady, like it was breathing. I always locked that window before bed. I double-checked it every night, especially since I moved into the cabin. Old place, older locks, surrounded by nothing but pines and a narrow gravel road half a mile out. The kind of setting where you made sure things stayed closed. I finally pushed myself up on my elbows. The air felt colder than it should have for early autumn. My phone said 2:14 a.m., no notifications, no wind advisory. just the dim glow of the screen lighting the room. Outside, past the curtain, something glowed faintly. Not bright, not like a spotlight, just a soft, pale blue. It drifted between the trees behind the cabin, steady and slow, like someone walking with a lantern held low. But the light wasn't swinging or flickering. It stayed perfectly even. I watched it through the sliver of window, barely breathing. Whatever it was moving deeper into the woods, the opposite direction of the road. Each second it got a little dimmer, until it was the same shade as the moonlight. And then I couldn't tell if I was still seeing it, or imagining the afterglow in my eyes. I rubbed my face, trying to shake off sleep, but the cold air wouldn't let me pretend I dreamed any of this. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet hitting the creaky floorboards. The whole cabin was silent in that heavy way where every sound seems too loud, even your breathing. I walked to the window and pushed the curtain aside. The glass was fogged from the temperature difference, but the bottom pane was open a few inches. The lock was still in the closed position, which made my stomach twist. It was one of those old metal latches you had to physically slide and push down to secure. It couldn't just lift on its own. I checked the frame for cracks or anything that might have let it slip open. Nothing looked tampered with. The wood was old but solid. The lock was tight, but the window was open anyway. The woods behind my place, just a wall of pines swallowing the night. No glow now, just the faint suggestion of moonlight catching the branches. I shut the window fully and made sure the lock was engaged. Then I checked it again, and again. When I stepped back, the room felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not dangerous, just off, like something had been in the air and hadn't fully cleared out. Down the hall, the refrigerator hummed once and then went silent. All of the appliances in this place were old, so weird noises weren't surprising, but the way it cut off felt abrupt, like power had blinked for a second even though the lights stayed steady. I walked to the kitchen and checked the stove clock. It was still on, 2:17 a.m., normal. But then I noticed that the microwave clock read 2:09, and the coffee maker read 2:32. None of them matched, not even close. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if they'd been like that earlier. I didn't think so. I had made dinner around 7, and the stove time matched my phone then. I was pretty sure it did anyway. I walked to the sliding door that faced the lake, just to check it. Locked. Curtains undisturbed. No strange glow out there, just the faint outline of water reflecting the sky. I went back to the bedroom, grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, and hovered near the window again. I told myself I wasn't going outside, I wasn't that stupid, but I kept the light in my hand like it meant something. For a long moment, I just listened. The woods were dead silent. No wind, no insects, no distant owl or coyote, nothing. Silence in the forest isn't rare, but this was different. It felt thick, like the sound had been taken away rather than just stopping naturally. I backed away from the window without turning my back on it. The room felt colder again, even though the window was shut. I went to the living room and turned on the small lamp next to the couch. The warm light helped, but only a little. The cabin wasn't big, just 2 rooms, a bathroom, and the small kitchen, but every corner suddenly seemed too dark. At 2:28 a.m., the refrigerator hummed on again. The noise startled me so hard I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up, I noticed something else. The clock on the stove now said 2:28:2, and so did the microwave and the coffee maker. All 3 had synced to the same minute. I blinked at them, wondering if maybe I had remembered the times wrong before. Then the microwave's screen dimmed and brightened once, like someone had waved a hand in front of the sensor, even though it didn't have one. I moved away from the kitchen slowly. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the lamp on, the flashlight next to me, and my back against the wall so I could see both windows. Every so often I checked the woods through the front window. Nothing. No motion. No glow. But the silence lasted for hours. Around 6, right before sunrise, I cracked the bedroom window open again, just an inch, and leaned close, listening. This time, there were birds. Normal sounds. The woods waking up like they always did. I got dressed and stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was cold, but normal cold, like not that strange, heavy chill from earlier. The grass had dew on it like usual. No footprints, no marks on the deck. Nothing unusual at all. but the woods felt watched in a way I couldn't put into words, like something had just been there and stepped out of sight before I opened the door. I walked down the porch stairs and stopped a few feet from the tree line. The ground was soft, no strange prints, no scorch marks, no disturbed branches, nothing that would line up with any light moving through here in the middle of the night. I stayed there longer than I meant to, listening. The birds kept singing. A small breeze moved the tops of the pines. Everything seemed normal. But when I turned to go back inside, something flickered at the corner of my eye. I spun around fast, just trees. But the light between two trunks looked slightly lighter than the rest of the forest, like something had been there a moment before and left its shape in the air. I stood rooted for a few seconds, staring into that spot until it blended back in with everything else. Inside, the clocks were all still synced, all reading 6:07 a.m. I made coffee just to feel grounded, but even the smell felt strange, sharper than usual, like my senses were still in night mode. Before going to work, I checked the bedroom window one more time. Locked. Solid, exactly how I had left it. Nothing looked tampered with. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had reached in, not physically, but close enough to affect the room. Close enough to see me. I never saw that soft blue glow again. Not like that first night. But sometimes when I take the trash out late, or I step onto the porch after sunset, the woods behind the cabin feel too still. Just for a second. Like something deeper in the trees has paused whatever it's doing to listen back. And I always go inside a little faster after that. I was walking home from my friend Mason's place when it happened. It was around 12:45 a.m., a cold, dry night in early November, the kind where the air feels empty and every sound has an edge to it. Mason lived only a few blocks from me in our neighborhood in Longford, a quiet mix of small houses and old apartment buildings. I was sober, clear-headed, not tired enough to be imagining things, just ready to get home, shower, and sleep. The street lamp on the corner of Kingsley and Aurora had always flickered ever since I moved into my apartment. I didn't think much of it when I approached it. The road was empty. No cars, no people, not even distant traffic, just the low hum of the lamp and the scrape of my boots on the sidewalk. I only looked down because something felt off in my periphery. It's hard to explain, like movement that didn't match mine. When I glanced at the ground ahead of me, my shadow was stretched all the way across the street. Not long like at sunset, but absurdly long, reaching almost to the hedge on the other side. It looked thin and warped, like someone had grabbed the top of my head and pulled. I stopped walking, expecting the shadow to snap back to normal. It didn't. For a moment, it held that stretched shape, still pulled across the asphalt even though I wasn't moving. I took a step back. My shadow didn't move. Not right away. There was maybe a second, one full second, before it slid back toward me, skittering across the pavement in a way that didn't match my motion at all, like a delayed animation or a puppet catching up after the strings got tangled. I let out this tiny sound I wasn't proud of, somewhere between a gasp and a curse. My breath came out in a cloud that drifted sideways, even though there was no wind. I turned around, checking behind me, half expecting someone with a flashlight or car headlights to be messing with me. Nothing, just empty road and dark windows. I walked forward again, slow this time. My shadow stretched longer, but instead of shifting smoothly, it lagged by half a step and then snapped to match me. That little snap was worse than the delay. Something about it felt wrong in a way my brain didn't know how to process. I told myself the bulb could be faulty, flickering at some frequency that messed with the way shadows behaved. But the lamp was steady, humming in that constant electrical way. No flicker, no dimming. I stepped out from under the light altogether, moving into the darker stretch of sidewalk. My shadow faded like normal. I felt this huge rush of relief, like maybe I just worked myself up. Then the humming got louder. Not by a lot, just enough that I noticed. The street lamp overhead brightened, not dramatically, but with a shift in tone, like the filament inside was warming far beyond what it should. The light washed across the street, too white, too even. For a moment, it looked like midday, and then the shadows came back. Not just mine. The street sign, the mailbox, the small decorative tree in front of the Larson family's house, Everything cast shadows that stretched away from the lamp in sharp, perfect lines. At first, they behaved normally. Then, slowly, they lengthened. All of them, growing out across the pavement in the exact same direction, pulling farther and farther until they touched each other. I didn't move. I felt pinned in place, like my body was waiting for instructions from somewhere else. When I lifted my hand slightly, my shadow didn't respond. It stayed in its stretched position, arm still by its side. Another delay, then a rough, jarring catch-up, like a skipping frame in an old video. Something else changed too. The hum kept deepening, shifting from a high electrical buzz to something lower, almost like a vibration in my ribs. I felt it more than heard it. It took me a second to realize the sound wasn't coming from the street lamp anymore. It was coming from above it. I looked up really slowly. The top of the lamp was swallowed in brightness. White, cold light that didn't look like it came from the bulb. It was too strong, too steady, and the metal pole cast no shadow at all. Something was hovering just above it. I couldn't see a shape clearly. It looked like the air itself was warping, a faint distortion like heat over asphalt. But it wasn't warm. The air around me felt colder the longer I watched it. My breath came out in thicker clouds. The distortion moved slightly, shifting left as if it was adjusting itself to get a better angle on me. Every shadow on the street, including mine, shifted with it, realigning in a perfect arc. The mailbox shadow jerked like it resisted for a millisecond before falling back into place. I stumbled backward. My shadow trailed behind, delayed by half a heartbeat before it jerked after me, snapping into position like it was reluctant to follow. The glow above the street lamp pulsed once, a faint ripple of light that spread outward and made every surface, pavement, windows, even the leaves of the Larson's tree reflect dull, bluish highlights. That pulse hit my chest like a soft shove. I felt the air go still, completely still. No breeze, no hum, no insects. The whole block fell into this terrible quiet like the world was holding its breath. Then the distortion above the lamp rose, not fast, but steady. As it turned upward, the shadows all twisted, bending toward it. Mine curled so sharply it looked like I was leaning forward even though I was upright. The ground under me got noticeably darker, like the light was being pulled away. When it reached maybe 20 feet above the lamp, the distortion shimmered hard, like glass flexing, and then winked out. Gone. The lamp flickered violently, once, twice, and the light returned to its normal yellow. My shadow snapped back under me instantly, just a regular shape again. The other shadows went back to their normal angles too. The street felt real again. Boring, ordinary. The hum didn't return. I stood there breathing like I'd run a mile, staring at the empty space above the street lamp. Nothing moved. No cars went by. Not even a dog barked. Eventually, I forced myself to walk the rest of the way home. Every time I passed under another lamp, I checked my shadow nervously, but they all behaved exactly like they should. Normal lengths, normal shapes, no delays. When I finally got inside my apartment, I locked the door, checked the windows, then checked them again. The overhead light in my entryway flickered once just as I shut it off, and I froze. But it was nothing, just a normal flicker. I didn't sleep for hours. I just lay there replaying the moment when my shadow hesitated behind me, like it needed a second to remember how to follow. I still walk that route sometimes. I have to. It's the shortcut to Mason's place. I avoid the corner of Kingsley and Aurora when I can, but sometimes the long way feels worse, like I'm showing fear. The street lamp is still there, still humming, still flickering. I've never seen the shadows do anything strange again, but I don't like walking under it, and I don't look up at the space above it anymore. I was sitting on the dock behind my cousin's cabin, the one on Lake Harlow, when I saw it. It was August, a warm night, but not muggy. The kind where the air feels soft and the lake sits completely still. I'd gone down there after everyone else went to bed. My cousin, Mark, had gone in around 10, saying he had work in the morning. I stayed out with a cheap rod, not really expecting to catch anything. Mostly, I just liked the quiet. The dock creaked whenever I shifted. The water slapped lightly underneath, not waves, just little taps against the wood. I remember thinking it felt like the whole lake was holding its breath. It must have been close to midnight when the line gave a tiny tug. Too small to be anything real, probably just weeds, but I reeled it in anyway. The hook came up empty, and I let it fall back with a soft plunk. I wiped my hands on my shorts and leaned back against the cooler. That's when I noticed something move across the sky. It wasn't a shooting star, it wasn't a plane, it wasn't bright, more like a shimmer, like the air above a grill or a paved road on a hot day. It slid across the stars in a gentle arc, not fast, not slow, just steady, and it didn't wobble the way heat waves do. It kept the exact same shape the whole time. I straightened up, thinking maybe my eyes were tired. I blinked a few times, looked away at the tree line, then back up. It was still there. A distortion, a warped patch of night, drifting like it was following a set path. I could see stars through it, but they bent a little, like looking through a curved piece of glass. I got this weird feeling then, not panic, but a cold heaviness deep in my chest. It reminded me of when I was a kid and almost fell through the ice at my parents' pond. That moment right before your body reacts, when your brain hasn't caught up yet, but something inside you knows you're not looking at something normal. The shimmering curve kept moving until it reached a point just above the far side of the lake, maybe a little left of the boathouse. It paused there, not in the sense of slowing down. It just stopped, midair, like someone hit a button, no dip, no settling, just motion, then no motion. I leaned forward without meaning to. The dock creaked again. The distortion pulsed once, very softly, a tiny ripple outward like a ring spreading on water. Then it vanished. Not faded, not dissolved. It was simply there one moment and gone the next. The stars snapped back into perfect focus like they'd been waiting. I sat completely still, holding my breath without realizing it. The lake was silent. Even the insects had stopped. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. Eventually, I exhaled long and shaky and put my rod down. I told myself it was heat rising from the lake surface, even though the air wasn't warm enough for that. I told myself it was some kind of atmospheric thing, even though I'd lived in the Midwest my whole life and never seen anything remotely like it. Mostly, I sat there telling myself something logical because the alternative felt too strange. I thought about going back inside, but walking across that dark yard suddenly felt like the last thing I wanted to do. The cabin was only about 100 feet away, just up the hill, but the part between the dock and the porch light felt too exposed. So I stayed seated, gripping the edge of the dock with both hands, like I was expecting it to move. After a minute, I finally heard the insects again. A few chirps at first, then the chorus came back all at once, like someone pressed unmute on the world. That helped. It made everything feel normal again. But I kept glancing up. At one point, I saw something faint, a flicker way off near the treetops across the water. Not a shimmer this time, more like a flash, but too soft, too dull to be lightning. I sat perfectly still, waiting for another one. Nothing happened. I tried turning on my phone to record the sky, but the screen stayed black for a full 10 seconds before lighting up. No notifications. Battery still at 78%. But the delay, I'd never seen it do that before. I opened the camera. It froze on a single black frame. Then the phone rebooted itself. That got my skin crawling all over again. I put the phone face down beside me and tried to pretend it didn't matter. A little later, the fishing rod twitched. Not a normal twitch. It jerked sharply, bouncing against the dock. The kind of movement you'd expect from a big fish pulling hard. I grabbed it, reflexively, but the line wasn't tugging. It was vibrating. Fast. Like something down there was humming, or the water itself was shaking. I could feel it buzzing up the rod handle into my wrist. I yanked the line in as quickly as I could. The hook came up clean, no weeds, no fish, nothing. Just the empty metal glinting under the stars. The rod handle stopped vibrating the second the hook broke the surface. That was enough. I packed up everything as quickly as I could without actually running. I kept checking the sky, expecting the shimmer to reappear, but nothing moved. The stars looked normal, too normal, arranged exactly the way they should be. The walk to the cabin felt longer than it should have. The air seemed heavier, like the world hadn't fully gone back to normal yet. Halfway up the hill, I swear I felt a pressure in my ears, like a small pop, the kind you get when a plane descends. Inside, the cabin was dark except for the kitchen nightlight. Everything looked untouched. I locked the door behind me and checked it twice. When I walked past the microwave, I saw the time blinking 12. even though we hadn't had any power outages. My phone was still in my pocket. When I took it out, the time on the lock screen read 12:12, but the kitchen clock said 12:04. The bedroom clock said 11:51. None of them matched. I lay in bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling until I finally drifted off around dawn. The next morning, I went back down to the dock, just to see. The water was calm, normal. The fishing line was neatly coiled where I dropped it. Nothing on the wood looked disturbed, no weird prints or marks, no sign that anything strange had happened. I stood there for a while, staring at the exact part of the sky where the shimmer first appeared. It looked the same as always, blue, quiet, empty. But every time the lake breeze shifted, I felt a tiny prickle on the back of my neck, like the air remembered something even if everything else had reset. I haven't been out on that dock alone at night since. I was walking my dog Jasper around 9:30 at night, which was later than usual, but I'd gotten stuck on a work call and he'd spent the last half hour staring at me like I was personally ruining his life. The air in our neighborhood in Fort Collins had that early autumn chill. Not cold, just enough to make your breath faint in the air. Most of the houses were dark except for a few porch lights, and the street was quiet enough that you could hear the distant hum of the highway a couple miles out. Jasper was sniffing along the curb, taking forever to choose a spot, and I was scrolling on my phone with the leash looped around my wrist. That's when something passed over us. Or at least, the shadow did. It covered the street and the sidewalk and part of the yard across from me, wide and smooth, like someone holding a giant sheet of tinted glass over the neighborhood. It didn't swoop or flutter. It glided, slow and steady, like it wasn't part of the air at all. The weirdest part was that there was no sound, no wind shift, nothing. My first instinct was that a big aircraft flew low, maybe a medevac helicopter, but there was no noise, none. Jasper froze mid-sniff, head snapping up like someone flicked a switch inside him. I looked up, perfectly clear sky, stars bright, no clouds, no plane lights, nothing that could have cast any shadow at all. I kept staring, waiting for my eyes to adjust, for some delayed movement to show up, but the sky didn't change. It just sat there, blank and quiet. Jasper whimpered once, a soft, low sound he doesn't usually make unless something genuinely scares him. His tail lowered, and his ears pulled back. He wasn't looking up. He was staring straight ahead at the house across the street. I followed his gaze. The shadow had swept over that house's front yard, but now everything looked normal again. The grass, the walkway, the 2 lawn chairs the couple kept out by the maple tree, nothing seemed disturbed, but something felt off, like the whole scene had been rearranged slightly and then put back. I pulled Jasper closer and started walking again, even though my legs felt stiff. The leash was trembling, and for a second I thought he was trembling, but then I realized it was my hand shaking. A block later, I heard a faint clicking sound behind us. Not footsteps, not an animal running. It was too rhythmic, too evenly spaced, like a slow metronome tapping on wood. Tap, tap, tap. I turned around fast, expecting to see someone walking. The street was empty. The porches were dark, no cars going by. The tapping stopped instantly, like whatever had made it froze the second I looked. Jasper pressed into my leg, which he never does on walks. I forced myself to keep going. The tapping didn't return, but halfway up the next block, a motion light flicked on in someone's yard, then another across the street, then another. 3 in a row, lighting up almost simultaneously, even though nothing was moving around them. I checked the wind. There wasn't any. We passed under a big ash tree that arched over the sidewalk. I always liked that tree. It felt like a landmark that meant home was close. But as we walked under it, I felt something shift above us. Not the branches, something behind them. A dimness, like the air thickened for half a second. I didn't look up this time. I just felt it pass, the same gliding sense from before, but lighter now, more distant, like it was drifting higher. By the time we reached my block, my mouth was dry. My house was only 5 doors down, but it felt far. The street looked too long, like the perspective had stretched out just slightly. Every house looked a little darker than it should have. My neighbor, old Mr. Denning, usually had his living room lamp on this late. Tonight his windows were completely black. Halfway down the block, my phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced at the screen. No notification, no call, no text, just the home screen. Then it vibrated again, longer this time, almost like someone was holding their finger on the back of it. Jasper whined again and pulled forward, tugging the leash harder than he usually does. His fur was standing up along his back. The streetlight above us flickered once. Not a normal flicker. It dimmed like something moved between us and the bulb. A shape, a big one, smooth around the edges. I finally looked up again, even though every part of me didn't want to. There was nothing there. But the light was still dimmed, holding steady at a lower brightness, like something was blocking a quarter of it. Except there was nothing visible. No outline. No darkness. Just a sense of something occupying space it shouldn't have been able to occupy without being seen. I stared at that empty spot until my eyes hurt, trying to force the darkness into a shape, but it stayed stubbornly sky-colored. When the streetlight suddenly popped back to full brightness, the whole sidewalk lit up so fast I flinched. Jasper jumped, twisting around like he expected something to land behind him. Nothing did. The air was still. We practically jogged the last stretch home. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my phone buzzed again. I checked it. Still no missed calls, no notifications. But the time caught my eye. 9:48 p.m. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. The walk usually took 10 minutes, maybe 12, not almost 20. And we had only gone 2 blocks before I noticed everything starting to happen. I replayed it in my head. Every pause, every moment I stopped to look around. Didn't add up to that much time. Inside, Jasper went straight under the dining table and didn't come out even when I shook the treat bag. He kept staring toward the front door, ears pricked, body stiff. I sat on the couch to calm down, but then I noticed something else. The living room felt too cold. Not like AC cold, more like the air temperature had dropped outside and somehow seeped through the walls even though the windows were closed. I checked the thermostat. It read 72, same as always, but the air didn't feel 72. I walked to the front window. The blinds were already closed, but I lifted a slat to peek outside. The street looked completely still. All the motion lights were off again. The houses looked normal. The sky was clear, same stars, same quiet night. But I had the strangest feeling, not that something was out there watching me, but that something had been out there and was now somewhere else. Not gone, just not visible anymore. Not on this street, maybe not even close. And for some reason, that made me more nervous than if I'd actually seen something staring back. I sat on the couch with my hands clasped tight, listening to the house, waiting for Jasper to stop hiding. He didn't come out for almost an hour. And when he finally did, he sniffed around the front door like someone had been standing there the whole time. Sometimes I replay the moment that shadow passed over us. The first one, the one that covered the street. It wasn't the kind of shadow a bird or drone could make. It was too smooth, too steady, too big, and the sky had been clear, completely clear. I didn't see anything else in the sky that night. Even now, saying it out loud, it sounds ridiculous. A shadow with nothing to cast it. But I know what I saw, or at least what I felt. Something was above us. And even if I never see it again, I don't think Jasper ever forgot what it felt like either. I saw it as soon as I turned off County Road 12 and onto the stretch that cuts through the pines. I wasn't tired enough to be imagining things, but I was in that late-night headspace where the world feels a little thinner, around 1:45 a.m., heading back from my sister's place in Hartwell. It was cold, early March, the kind of night where the air has that dry snap to it. My windows were rolled up, the heater blowing just enough to keep the windshield from fogging. The road there is 2 lanes, no shoulder, nothing but trees. I'd driven it 100 times without thinking. But that night, maybe a mile in, I saw a soft white glow drifting above the treetops on my left. It wasn't bright, nothing dramatic. Just a pale smear of light, like someone shining a flashlight through fog. Except there was no fog and no beam, and the light moved too smoothly. It kept pace with my car, maybe 100 feet off the ground. At first I assumed it was the moon catching on mist or something boring, but the moon wasn't out, and the glow wasn't steady. It had this faint pulsing to it, like someone breathing slow. I eased off the gas, curious more than anything. The glow slowed too. Exactly. Same distance, same angle above the trees. I remember glancing at the speedometer like I expected it to give me an explanation. 42 miles an hour. I tapped the brakes again. 35. The glow drifted slower, keeping its position like it was tethered to me. I wasn't scared yet, just unsettled in a low, buzzing way. The kind of uneasy you get when you think someone's walking behind you, even though you know they aren't. I sped up again. 50. The glow glided forward with me. I tried convincing myself it was a helicopter, even though I knew better. Helicopters make noise. They strobe red and white. They wobble, hover, move off, come back. They don't match your speed to the exact mile per hour without any sound whatsoever. And they don't glow like that. Soft white, no edges, no structure. It wasn't brightening the tops of the trees either. That bothered me. You shine a strong light at a forest and the treetops glow, right? Shadows form, something reacts, but the pines below it were pitch black, like the glow existed only for me, not the landscape. I rolled down the window a crack to listen. Just wind, no rotor wash, not even distant engines. I drove another half-mile like that, watching it through the gaps in the trees. Every time the road curved, the glow seemed to adjust its angle, staying just left of me, same height, almost like it was pacing me deliberately. When the road straightened again, I tried something stupid. I braked hard, not enough to skid, but fast enough that everything in the passenger seat slid forward. The glow stopped instantly, not slowed, stopped, hanging there above the trees, perfectly still. A chill shot across my arms. I could feel it through my jacket. My first real spike of fear hit then. Not panic, just this heavy awareness that whatever it was, it knew what I was doing, or mirrored it in a way that wasn't mechanical or natural. I kept rolling at maybe 20 miles an hour, staring up and left. My headlights felt too weak for the road. The glow stayed frozen in place until I sped up again. Then it drifted along with me like before. I thought about pulling over right then, but the idea made my stomach twist. The road was too dark, the trees too tall, the quiet too absolute. Stopping felt like stepping out of a bright room into a basement with no light switch. A few minutes later, I reached the long straightaway by the river, the one stretch where the trees fall back and the sky opens up. I figured if the glow passed that gap, maybe I could see more of it. When the tree line broke, I finally got a clear look. There wasn't any object inside the glow, no solid shape. Just light, white, with a hint of blue at the edges, hovering above the far bank like a drifting soap bubble the size of a car. The pulsing was clearer now. It brightened and dimmed with a slow rhythm, almost hypnotic. And that lack of shadows again, it didn't light anything beneath it. The river didn't shimmer. The rocks didn't get illuminated. It floated over the world like a sticker placed on top of reality instead of in it. I slowed to a crawl without meaning to. The glow dimmed, matching my speed. I felt this pressure behind my eyes then. Not pain, more like someone pushing gently on the space between my thoughts. It made me blink, and when my eyes opened again, the glow was closer. Not by a lot, maybe 20 feet. But the way it had closed that distance, no movement, no approach, just suddenly nearer, made every hair on my neck stand straight up. I whispered, "No," under my breath. Not in fear exactly, more like I was reacting to someone stepping too close in a grocery store aisle. I sped up fast, pushing past 55. The glow drifted back to its original distance, keeping pace like nothing had changed. The pressure behind my eyes faded as soon as I accelerated. About 2 minutes later, I reached the old stone bridge. As soon as the road dipped toward it, the glow slowed again, then stopped above the middle of the river. Just hovered there, as still as a stuck reflection. I drove past it with my eyes flicking between the windshield and the left side window. It didn't follow me across the bridge, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the glow was there again. Farther back this time, maybe a quarter mile behind me, floating above the road. It wasn't chasing, just keeping watch. I pressed the gas hard, trying to put distance between me and it. The glow held its position in the mirror, not getting smaller or fading away, like the road was stretching behind me instead of bringing me farther from anything. When I reached the turnoff for my road, Eagle Bend Lane, the glow didn't follow. It stayed straight on the main highway like it wasn't interested in this direction. I could see it between the trees for another few seconds, drifting forward again at the speed I'd been driving before. Then it was gone. Not vanished in a flash, just eased out of view around a bend. The way taillights disappear when a car turns, except it wasn't red and it wasn't tied to anything I could name. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking. I sat there with the engine running for a long minute. The house was dark. The porch light timer hadn't kicked on. Usually Max, my dog, barks when I pull in, but the yard was silent, too silent. When I opened the front door, Max was standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the back window. His ears were pinned back. He didn't bark at me. He didn't even move until I said his name twice, like he'd been listening to something I couldn't hear. I checked the backyard through the window he'd been fixed on. Nothing. Just the neighbor's fence and the old swing set, but the air smelled faintly like ozone. Not strong, just enough to notice. I locked every door even though I usually don't bother, made a half-assed sweep of the house, and eventually sat on the couch with the TV on low volume because the silence felt wrong. Max stayed close, which he never does. He's usually all over the place at night. I didn't sleep until the sky started to lighten, and even then, the dream I slipped into kept replaying the same moment, the glow matching my speed like it had eyes on me, like it was waiting for me to do something different. I drove that same stretch the next afternoon, hoping maybe I'd find scorch marks or a drone wreck or something I could point to, but it was just trees, just road, just quiet. Nothing else ever happened there, but now, every time I drive home late, I check the treetops without even thinking about it, just in case the glow decides to match my speed again. I woke up because of the hum. Not a noise so much as this low, even vibration that seemed to fill every corner of my bedroom at the same time. It wasn't loud. If anything, it was gentle, almost soft, but it felt wrong in a way I can't explain, like it didn't belong in the air. I sat up fast, thinking maybe something in the apartment was about to short out. I live in this older complex on the edge of Whitewater, Wisconsin. Cheap place, thin walls, hollow doors, nothing that should produce a sound like that. But the hum didn't come from one direction. It was everywhere. It was in the mattress, the air, my chest. I even held my breath to make sure it wasn't something with the vents. The digital clock on my nightstand was glowing 2:14 a.m. I remember that because a second later it blinked off, just went dark, and then came back on, showing 12. At the exact same moment, the hum stopped. Everything felt suddenly too quiet, like the room had taken a breath and was holding it. I swung my legs off the bed and walked around, touching things for no reason other than to make sure they were real. The lamp came on fine. My phone worked, the fan was still spinning, but when I checked the microwave clock in the kitchen, it was flashing 12:02. So was the stove. So was the cable box. All of them had reset at once, like the place had lost power, but I hadn't felt the lights flicker and the fan never stopped spinning. And the hum, whatever it was, had definitely not been a normal electrical thing. I tried to shake it off. Power surges happen. Old buildings do weird stuff. But as I stood in the hallway, I noticed something else. The air felt charged, staticky. Not enough to shock me, but enough that the hair on my arms was lifting. I went to the window over the parking lot. The sky was dim, cloudy, but there was this faint blue tint that didn't match any streetlights. I checked around for some truck or headlights bouncing off the clouds, but the lot was empty, except for a couple cars. No movement, no sound. I crawled back into bed and tried to sleep, but I couldn't get rid of that feeling in my chest, like the hum had left an echo inside me. Around 3:40, I finally started drifting off. That's when the hum started again. Instantly, like someone flipped a switch. No buildup, no warning, just the same low vibration filling the room. I sat up so fast, the sheets tangled around my legs. The clock on my nightstand blinked off again, then came back on. 12. I watched it this time. It didn't fade or glitch. It clicked off like someone cut its power, stayed dark for a beat, then lit back up with all zeros. Same exact pattern as before. The hum didn't last as long this time. Maybe 10 seconds, but it was stronger. I could feel it behind my eyes. That pressure you get when you're about to get a headache, except it didn't hurt. It just pressed like invisible hands were gently pushing on the inside of my skull. When it ended, the silence hit even harder than before. I got up again, but this time I walked through every room, flipping lights, checking outlets, trying to convince myself there was some normal cause. But the living room clock was reset now. My computer screen was on, even though I'm positive I'd turned it off before bed. Not asleep, actually on, showing the login screen. And the time in the corner was 12:02. Even my old digital wristwatch on the counter had reset. Didn't even have a backlight strong enough to see from across the room, yet it showed the exact same wrong time as everything else. Every device in the apartment was synchronized to the same moment, but not the right one. I went outside because I suddenly couldn't stand being inside. The air was cool and still. No wind, no cars on the road. A train horn sounded way off in the distance, but it felt out of place, like it didn't belong in the night. Up above the lot, the sky still had that weird blue tint, like the clouds were lit from behind by something soft and indirect. No source I could point to. Not the moon. Not anything I'd ever seen. I stayed out there maybe 10 minutes, but when I went back inside, my phone, which I'd left on the coffee table, had rebooted on its own. The lock screen showed 12:01, not 3:50-ish, not 4, just 12:01. I tested the outlet by plugging in my laptop charger. The fridge was humming normally. Nothing else in the apartment seemed wrong, except the clocks and the air. And then, as I walked back to my bedroom, every device that had a display blinked off at the same exact second. Not in a big dramatic way, they just went dark. The hum didn't come back this time. Nothing moved. Nothing flickered. But every clock, every indicator light, every digital anything died for half a second and then came back. All of them showed 12 again. I stood there for a long time, trying to slow my breathing. The silence in the apartment felt thick, like someone had packed cotton into my ears. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" out loud, not expecting an answer, but feeling like I needed to say something. I sat on the edge of the bed again, hands shaking. I tried to think rationally. Power surge, transformer issue, maybe something wrong with the building wiring. But none of that explained the hum, or how everything reset at identical moments, or why the clocks didn't go to 12:01 or 12:02 until minutes later, only when I wasn't looking, or why my body felt like it had been vibrating from the inside. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, and that was when I noticed a faint glow up there. Not bright enough to light the room, just a soft bluish sheen across the drywall, like light leaking from a hidden source. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but as soon as the screen lit up, the glow faded out, leaving nothing but normal shadows. And I swear I smelled ozone again. Faint, but there. By then it was almost 5. I kept the lights on and just sat on the couch, refusing to sleep in case the hum returned. At some point, the normal daylight started pushing through the blinds, and the blue tint outside finally went back to its usual pale morning gray. When I checked the clocks again around 6, every single one finally showed the correct time after I reset them. Even my watch. Everything worked like normal, but I couldn't shake that feeling the hum had left behind, like something had passed through the apartment without touching anything, but everything reacted anyway. I didn't tell anyone the next day, didn't call the landlord, didn't check the breakers. I just went to work, exhausted, staring at the office clock every few minutes to make sure the numbers stayed put. They did. But that night, when I lay down in bed again, I kept one hand on my chest, waiting to feel that vibration return. It never did. Still, sometimes I wake up in the dark for no reason at all, and the first thing I do is check the clock, just to make sure it hasn't quietly gone back to 12 again. I set up camp later than I meant to. I'd driven up to Lake Silverborn after work, hoping to squeeze in one quiet night alone before the weekend crowds showed up. It was early September in northern Minnesota, cool enough that the bugs weren't bad, warm enough that I could get away with a thin jacket. By the time I got my little gray tent staked down near the shoreline, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, leaving this hazy blue light that faded fast. The lake was calm, almost flat. Not perfectly still, but close. Every sound carried, a loon somewhere on the far side, the soft clinking of my canoe nudging the rocks, an occasional splash from fish hitting the surface. I remember thinking it felt like the air was holding its breath. I got a small fire going. Nothing big, just enough to warm my hands. Ate a peanut butter sandwich because I was too tired to cook anything real. My phone had barely any signal, which I expected, so I turned it off and tossed it into the tent. By the time real darkness set in, fog had started rolling in from the middle of the lake. Not thick at first, just low wisps that skimmed the water. It made the moon look smeared, like someone had wiped a thumb across it. I tried listening to a podcast, but shut it off after a few minutes. The voices felt too loud in the quiet, like they didn't belong out there. Around 10, I decided to walk down to the edge of the water. I brought a small flashlight, but didn't turn it on right away. The fog was heavier by then, a pale layer that spread out across the lake and crept toward shore. I could still see maybe 30 or 40 feet ahead, but everything beyond that was swallowed up in gray. That's when I noticed the ripples. They were way out, far beyond where someone could swim to without a canoe. But I hadn't heard anyone else pull up or paddle by. And these ripples weren't random either. They looked intentional, like something was pushing just under the surface in a slow, steady line. I knelt down, trying to hear anything over the gentle lap of water on the rocks. Nothing. No engine. No splashing. Just that weird expanding circle of movement far from shore. I stood there for maybe a full minute before something changed. The ripples stopped, not faded, not drifted away, just stopped. Like whatever had been moving suddenly froze in place. I clicked on my flashlight then, even though the narrow beam didn't reach anywhere near the disturbance. All it did was light up the fog in front of me, turning it into this glowing white screen. I felt stupid standing there pointing a cheap flashlight into nothing, but I couldn't shake the instinct that something was out there. The ripples started again, faster this time, closer. I stepped back without meaning to. My heel hit a rock and almost rolled my ankle. The water stayed dark, but those ripples were definitely heading toward my side of the lake. I killed the flashlight. It only made the fog brighter and my own reflection harder to see. The ripples came to a stop about 100 feet out, maybe more. Hard to tell in that fog. Then something rose. At first I thought it was a big fish surfacing, maybe a sturgeon. But it wasn't the right shape, and it didn't break the surface with any sound. The water just bulged upward, smooth and glassy, forming a dome that lifted an inch at a time. Then the shape cleared the surface completely. A sphere, pale, almost white, but not glowing. More like it was made of something that caught the little moonlight there was and softened it. Maybe the size of a basketball, maybe bigger. Hard to tell with the distance and the fog. It didn't drip when it came out of the water. It didn't rotate or tilt or bob around like something fighting gravity, it just rose. I held my breath without noticing. My hands felt numb. For a second, I wondered if this was some weird fog reflection or a trick of the moon. But the ripples spread out from beneath the sphere in a perfect circle. I could see that clearly. Something had definitely lifted out of the lake. It kept rising until it hovered about 6 or 7 feet above the water. I waited for a sound, any sound. A buzz, a hum, even a splash. Nothing, just silence and that sphere hanging there like someone had paused time. My mind scrambled for explanations. A balloon? A drone? Some weather instrument? But balloons don't rise in dead straight lines like that. They don't move without drifting, and drones make noise, even the quiet ones. The fog thickened around it, swirling a little like it was reacting. I couldn't see the far shore anymore. The sphere looked like the only solid thing in the world. Then, and I still don't understand how fast this happened, the sphere shot upward. No acceleration, no buildup, just gone. 1 second it was hovering above the water, the next it was a pale blur streaking straight up into the fog. Not angled, not drifting sideways, straight up like it had been yanked by an invisible wire. I actually took a step back and almost tripped over my own fire pit. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it behind my eyes. When I looked at the lake again, the fog had already collapsed back down, rolling in thick and low. The ripples spread outward and faded, leaving nothing but still water. Within maybe 20 seconds, there was no sign that anything had been there. I stayed frozen until the cold finally made my teeth start chattering. Back at the fire, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Fog does weird things with light. Eyes play tricks when you're tired. But I kept replaying it in my head, and the part that always stuck wasn't the sphere itself. It was the water. Water doesn't rise like that. Not in perfect silence, not without breaking or dripping. I poured out the rest of my water bottle onto the fire and zipped myself inside the tent. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just lay there listening, waiting for any sound from the lake. A splash, a ripple, anything. Instead, the fog scraped quietly along the nylon walls, making this soft, gritty noise like sand shifting in a jar. Every so often, the air pressure in the tent felt different, like something outside had moved past it and displaced the atmosphere. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed my phone screen light up even though I hadn't turned it on. It booted up on its own, showed the lock screen for a second, then went dark. No notifications, no battery warning, nothing. I didn't dare reach for it. By dawn, the fog had burned off enough to see the lake again. Perfectly calm, no marks on the shore, no tracks, no sign of anything. I packed up without eating, barely even sipped the coffee I made. The whole time I kept glancing at the water, half expecting those ripples to start again. They didn't. When I got back home and charged my phone, it turned on like normal. No record of the reboot. No weird glitches, nothing strange in my photos or videos, not that I took any. But that image, the sphere rising out of the lake without a single sound, stayed burned into my mind in a way that didn't feel like imagination. I haven't gone back to Silverbourne since, and every time I see fog rolling across a lake on my drives now, I look away. I don't want to know if something's moving out there again, or if it's already watching from under the surface. I was hiking the Cedar Ridge Trail just outside of Millerton the evening it happened. I'd gotten off work late and didn't feel like going home yet, so I drove straight to the trailhead with a granola bar and a half-full water bottle. It was early June, warm, a little sticky, and dusk had that orange glow that makes everything look softer. The trail wasn't long, maybe 3 miles round trip, and I told myself I'd turn around before dark. About 20 minutes in, I noticed how loud the woods were. The cicadas were screaming, birds still chirping their last calls, something small rummaging in the brush beside me. It was the usual noise you get right before night really settles in. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the shade and the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves. A few minutes later, the forest went dead quiet. Not gradually, not in that natural way where one species settles down and another takes over. This was instant. Like somebody hit a mute button and every living thing obeyed. I actually looked up, expecting, I don't know, a hawk or something, but there was nothing but patchy sky through the branches. My first thought was that maybe a predator had wandered through. We get black bears sometimes and coyotes, but even then you usually hear something, a branch crack, leaves shifting. This wasn't that. It was like the air itself was holding still. I kept walking, slower now. My boots sounded too loud on the dirt, like I was the only thing moving in the entire forest. I tried humming to break the tension, but even my own voice felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. That's when I saw the light. It appeared straight ahead, maybe 30 or 40 yards up the trail, floating between 2 thick pines. At first, I thought someone had turned on a flashlight, but this wasn't shaped like a beam. It wasn't even shaped like anything I recognized. It was just a sphere of light, bright but not blinding, perfectly round, hanging in midair about 6 feet off the ground, and it was pulsing, not flickering, not dimming from movement, pulsing in a slow, even rhythm, like a heartbeat. I froze, not because I wanted to, but because every muscle locked up all at once. My brain felt like it split in two, half of me screaming to run, the other half stuck staring because none of this made sense. For a second, I really did try to convince myself it was someone's camping lantern. Maybe a hiker had hung it on a tree branch and walked away, but it was too smooth, too uniform, no shadows, no edges. Just a ball of white light that looked like it was made out of nothing. The longer I stared, the more I realized the trees around it weren't behaving right. The branches closest to the sphere weren't moving at all. No flutter from the breeze, no shifting. They were completely still. But the rest of the branches, farther out, swayed gently. Normally, I took one slow step backward. The sphere pulsed again, brighter this time. My chest tightened, like the air pressure changed for half a second. I could feel the pulse in my ribs. That snapped me out of it. I turned slightly, ready to sprint back the way I came, but something about the trail behind me felt wrong. Too dark, even for dusk. Like the shadows were heavier. So I stayed facing forward. The sphere didn't move at first. It just hovered there, pulsing evenly. I could see tiny specks drifting around it. Not dust, not insects, more like little motes of faint light. They circled the sphere slowly, almost lazily. Then the sphere slid sideways. That's the only way I can describe it. Not floated, not drifted. Slid. Like someone clicked and dragged it across a screen. No sway, no bob, no arc. Just a perfect straight horizontal movement between the trees. I felt a cold wave run through me, even though the air was warm. My legs started shaking. I kept waiting for the light to reveal a drone, or a person holding equipment, or anything logical. But there was nothing behind it, nothing casting it, nothing holding it up. It stopped again, maybe 15 feet to the right of where it had been. The forest around it still hadn't made a single sound, not even the wind. I whispered, "Hello?" Which sounds ridiculous now, but I didn't know what else to do. The word barely left my throat before the sphere pulsed twice in quick succession, like it responded. I clamped my mouth shut. Another pulse. Slightly brighter. Another. The pulses weren't random. There was a rhythm to them, a pattern, not Morse code or anything recognizable, just this steady, deliberate sequence that felt intentional, like something was watching to see what I would do. I took another step back. My heel snapped a twig, and the crack echoed like a gunshot. The sphere slid again, toward me this time. Not fast, not aggressively, just closer. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and catching myself with both hands on the ground. The dirt felt weirdly warm, which didn't make sense. My palms tingled. When I looked back up, the sphere had stopped moving. It was hovering exactly where I'd been standing. I scrambled to my feet and backed away farther. The sphere didn't follow this time. It just hung there, pulsing slowly like it was memorizing the space I'd occupied. Then it drifted backward, not toward the deeper woods, sideways, again, sliding in a perfectly straight line until the trees started swallowing it up. The white glow dimmed a little as the fog on the forest floor thickened. For a second, I thought it was gone, but then it pulsed one more time. A bright, slow throb that seemed to fill the air around me, not with sound, but with pressure. Like the moment before a thunderclap, but stretched out and silent. Then it slid out of sight completely, deeper into the trees. As soon as it disappeared, the forest sounds rushed back all at once. Cicadas, birds, rustling branches, like someone unmuted the world. It was so sudden that I actually flinched. I didn't run. Running felt like the worst possible move. I just walked, fast but steady. My breathing was loud in my ears, and every time I blinked, I expected to see that light again. When I got back to the trailhead, the air felt normal. My car looked normal. Everything smelled normal. Dirt, pine, dust. But when I grabbed the door handle, I noticed something off. The metal was warm. Too warm. Like it had been sitting in direct sunlight for hours, even though the sun had been down for at least 20 minutes. Inside the car, the dashboard clock was wrong. Blinking 7. It always resets like that when the battery dies, but the car started on the first try. On the drive home, every time a patch of trees closed in around the road, I kept expecting to see that same pulsing light slip between the trunks. I never did. But for weeks afterward, every time dusk came around, I felt that pressure in my chest again. The echo of those slow, steady pulses hanging in the silent air of the forest. Whatever that light was, it left something behind. Not a mark. Not a clue. Just this feeling that it watched me as carefully as I watched it. I pulled into the rest stop off Highway 74 because my eyes were getting that tired, gritty feeling that comes right before you start drifting in your lane. It was almost midnight, and I'd been driving since late afternoon, trying to make it from Tucson to Riverside in one shot. The stretch I was on was one of the emptier parts. Nothing but desert and a few lonely gas stations scattered miles apart. The rest stop itself was basic. 2 bathrooms, a handful of picnic tables. A vending machine that buzzed like it was on its last legs. The air was warm but not unbearable, a dry late summer heat that felt like stepping into an oven that someone forgot to turn fully off. No other cars were there when I pulled in. Just me and the long row of dim overhead lights humming along the parking lot. I killed the engine and sat for a minute, letting the silence settle. My ears rang a little from the constant road noise. When I got out to stretch, the sky hit me first, clear and full of stars, brighter than you ever see near a city. I leaned against the hood, letting the warmth from the engine soak into my legs. I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't waiting for anything weird. I was just zoning out, breathing slowly, staring up at the sky. Then the stars flickered. Not like clouds passed over them, not like my eyes blinked. This was different. The flicker moved in a line across the sky, right to left, smooth and controlled, like someone ran a dimmer switch along a strip of lights. At first I thought it was a plane, maybe reflecting light in a weird way, but there was no aircraft, no contrail, nothing even close to that pattern. And it wasn't just one star, it was a band of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, dimming and brightening in a rhythm. It reminded me of signal lights, or a sequence. I stared so hard my eyes watered. I wiped them and looked again, and the flickering was still happening, moving steadily, almost methodically. When it reached a cluster of stars overhead, they faded out completely for a second, leaving a clean, dark patch, then popped back on in the same strange sequence. I don't know how long I stood there watching before I realized my breathing had gone shallow. My whole body tensed, but I couldn't look away. It was too clean, too coordinated. Stars don't behave like that. Not all at once, and not in a sweeping line like someone brushing a hand across them. I blinked once. The sky was normal again, perfectly normal. Every star right where it should be. No movement, no flicker, nothing strange. I blinked again. Still normal. That's when I felt the weird heaviness, that subtle shift in the air when something is wrong but you don't know what yet. My heart was beating too fast, but I told myself it was just exhaustion messing with me. I reached into my pocket for my phone to check the time. The screen said 12:21. I frowned. I was almost sure it had been 12:11 before I got out of the car. I checked my watch, 12:21. Same thing. I would have sworn only a minute or two had passed, maybe 3. But 10 minutes? I looked around the rest stop. Everything looked exactly the same. The lights, the vending machine, the bathrooms. No people, no cars. No sound except the low hum of electricity and the faint desert wind brushing the dry bushes. I sat back down in the driver's seat just to get my thoughts straight. My keys were still in the cup holder. My water bottle was where I left it. But the air inside the car felt colder than it should have been after sitting in desert heat. Not freezing, just noticeably cool. Like someone had opened the door for a while and let the night air in. I checked the locks. All were down. I tried to convince myself I had simply zoned out for 10 minutes. Maybe I'd micronapped without realizing. But I didn't feel that kind of groggy. I felt wired, alert. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself to just breathe and stop being dramatic. So I grabbed my water bottle, got back out, and headed toward the vending machine. It buzzed more loudly the closer I got, a weird, choppy vibration that didn't sound like any machine I'd heard before. I tapped the glass, half expecting static to jump through my fingers. Nothing happened. But when I looked up again, not even all the way up, just tilting my head, I saw the stars shift. Not flickering this time, shifting, like the whole sky tilted 1 degree to the left and then snapped back. Not a big movement, not something anyone else might have noticed unless they were staring right at it. But I saw it. My gut lurched. My knees nearly buckled. I whispered, "No, no, no," without meaning to, like saying it out loud could undo what I'd seen. I backed away from the vending machine and the buzzing grew louder for a second before dying completely. Just cut off mid-vibration like someone unplugged it. All the lights in the rest stopped dimmed at the exact same moment. Then brightened again. Every hair on my arms stood up. I spun around, scanning the desert beyond the parking lot. The brush didn't move. The air didn't move. It was like the environment was holding still the same way the forest had once gone quiet on another hike years before. The silence pressed in, thick and uncomfortable. I checked my watch again. 12:21. No change. I got back in the car, hands shaking so hard, I dropped the keys the first time I tried to turn them. When the engine finally turned over, the radio came on automatically, but not on the same station I'd been listening to, just static, low and steady. I switched stations, more static, every station. I shut off the radio. For a second, I just sat there, staring through the windshield at the dark, empty rest stop. Nothing moved, nothing changed. If someone had driven by right then, they'd have seen a completely normal scene. Just a lone traveler sitting in his car, engine running, lights on. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had noticed me, noticing it. I pulled back onto the highway faster than I probably should have. The road ahead was empty and stretched out like a black ribbon with no end. I kept checking the sky every couple of seconds, terrified I'd see those rhythmic flickers again. I didn't. But about 5 miles down the road, the radio crackled to life for half a second, just one sharp burst of noise, before going dead again. I drove the rest of the way to Riverside without stopping. I didn't look at the stars again for the rest of the trip, or for a long time afterward. Even now, when I think about it, I remember that band of stars dimming one after another, like someone running their fingers across a set of switches. I try to tell myself it was just fatigue, a trick of the eyes, anything normal. But there's this small, stubborn part of me, the part that keeps waking up at 12:21 for no reason, that knows I didn't imagine it. Something was up there, and for at least 10 minutes, whatever it was, held my attention long enough to take something from me I still can't account for. I noticed the light about 20 minutes after leaving Claremont. It was around 11:30 p.m., late enough that the highway between towns was almost empty. I'd just finished a long shift at the warehouse, and I was driving back to my place in Rockwell, which was still a good 2 hours out. The sky was clear, moonless, and sharp enough that I could see every star above the fields. At first, I didn't think anything of the light. It looked like a bright headlight from a distant car, way behind me, barely more than a speck in the rearview mirror. Nothing moved out there except the occasional semi, so seeing one tiny point of light wasn't weird. But after 10 minutes, it was still there. Same distance, same brightness, not fading, not getting closer. I remember glancing at the mirror more than I should have, the way you do when you think someone might be behind you. It wasn't tailgating or anything. If anything, it felt impossibly far back. But it stayed pinned in the exact same spot in the mirror, like it was locked there. I tried to ignore it. I turned up the radio a little, some late-night talk station where the host's voice blended into the engine noise. The road curved long, sweeping bends through flat farmland. Usually, any car behind you shifts in the mirror when the road turns. The angle changes, the lights slide around. This one didn't. It stayed perfectly centered. I kept checking, telling myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe the car behind me was taking the curves at the same speed, same angle, just happening to stay aligned with my mirror. Still, the longer it lasted, the stranger it felt. It wasn't bright enough to be high beams, more like a single focused point, not white exactly, but a pale, cold blue. Around midnight, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It startled me because I wasn't expecting anything. When I reached for it, the screen was dark, no new notifications. The buzz had been like a phantom vibration, but too strong to be in my head. I set it back down and checked the mirror again. Same light, same place. The next town, Marston, was still 20 minutes off. Just open highway and dead fields stretching out in every direction. I was starting to feel tense without really knowing why. My hands kept tightening around the wheel, relaxing, tightening again. After maybe another 15 minutes, I slowed down. Not by much, just enough to test something. If it was a car, the distance between us should have changed a little. The light didn't move. My chest felt tight. I pressed the gas a little harder, up to 5 miles over the limit. The car hummed, engine pushing steady, and I waited for the light to shift. Still nothing. I didn't speed up more. Something about the whole thing made me afraid of drawing attention to myself. Like if I made too much of a move, whatever it was might react. A mile marker went by on my right. I don't remember the number. I only remember the sense of being farther from anything than I'd ever felt. No houses, no farm lights, no cars coming the other way, just darkness and that point of blue hovering behind me. At some point I realized the radio had gone silent. Not static, silent. The screen still showed the station info, but no sound came out. I tapped the volume knob. Nothing. I turned the whole unit off and back on. Dead quiet. That was when I decided to pull over. I didn't slam on the brakes or anything dramatic. I eased off the gas, letting the car slow on its own, and steered onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires. The whole car shuddered a little as it came to a stop. The light in the mirror didn't change. I kept my hands on the wheel for a few seconds before reaching down and shutting off the engine. The headlights stayed on for a moment until I switched them off too. Suddenly, the world outside felt huge and empty. The darkness swallowed my car like it wasn't supposed to be there at all. I leaned closer to the rearview mirror, expecting the light to do something now that I'd stopped. For a moment, it didn't. Then it rose, not floating forward, not drifting sideways. It rose straight up, smooth as if it were being pulled by a string only it could see. Up, up, up. Tiny movements at first, then faster, until it was nearly vertical above where it had been on the road. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The light paused high in the sky, just one beat, and then it blinked out. Gone. Not dimmed, not flew away. Gone. The sky looked normal again. Too normal. Every star in its place, cold and perfect. I sat there longer than I want to admit, maybe 10 minutes, could have been more. I kept waiting for something else to happen. Another light, a sound, the radio turning on by itself, anything. Nothing did. Eventually, I turned the car back on. The engine started fine, but the radio screen was frozen. I held the power button until it rebooted. When it came back, the time was wrong by 8 minutes. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't been stopped that long. The rest of the drive felt like I was underwater, like every sound was muffled just a little too much. No cars passed me. No lights came up behind me or ahead of me. When I rolled into Rockwell, the streetlights looked dimmer than usual. My apartment felt too quiet when I walked inside. I plugged my phone in, and for a second the screen didn't respond. Then it lit up all at once, every notification from the past hour hitting simultaneously. Nothing about that night made sense. But the part that stays with me, the part that still creeps into my mind when I'm driving alone at night, is how that single point of light followed me with absolute precision for so long. Not chasing, not drifting, just watching, keeping pace, like it was waiting for me to stop. I was out on the old service road behind Millen Park with my friend Jenna when it happened. The place wasn't really meant for stargazing. Half the benches were broken, and the trail lights hadn't worked in years. But the trees opened up enough that you could see a big stretch of sky without too much glare from town. We used to go out there during college when we wanted to talk without bumping into anyone we knew. After graduation, we both stayed in town, and the habit stuck. That night was cold and unusually clear for late September. The kind of cold that feels sharp at the edges, but not miserable. We brought a thermos of coffee and sat on the hood of Jenna's car, watching the sky and talking about nothing important. At some point, we started trying to name constellations, even though neither of us actually remembered more than the obvious ones. I remember looking straight up and feeling like the stars were brighter than usual. Not twinkly or romantic, just bright, steady points. The air was still, no breeze at all, and the night felt quiet in that strange way where you can hear your own breathing. Jenna was the one who noticed it first. She nudged my shoulder, not urgently, just enough to get me to look where she pointed. "Hey," she said, "that one's weird." It took me a second to figure out which star she meant. It wasn't the brightest or biggest, just a normal-looking point of light sitting a bit off to the left of Cassiopeia. I probably wouldn't have noticed it if she hadn't said anything. "What's weird about it?" I asked. "It's blinking." I watched it, expecting the usual twinkle, but the light wasn't flickering randomly. It was blinking in a pattern. 3 short flashes, a pause, then 1 longer flash, then exactly the same thing again, and again. "Plane," I said, even though it didn't look like any plane light I'd ever seen. "It's not moving," she said. She was right. It stayed fixed in place, perfectly still, blinking its little pattern like it was signaling something. I stared at it long enough that I started to feel this pressure in my chest. Not fear exactly, but awareness. Like I was paying attention to something I normally would have ignored. We listened for the sound of an aircraft. Nothing. No distant hum, no wind pushing through the trees, no animals. It felt like the whole park was holding its breath. A minute passed, maybe 2. The star kept blinking with the same rhythm. Then Jenna said, "Okay, that's actually freaking me out a little." The weird part was, I wasn't freaked out yet, just confused. My brain was still trying to find the normal explanation. Satellite? Maybe? Drone? Except drones don't just hover that high, and satellites don't blink like that. I pulled out my phone and trying to zoom in. The screen made the star look like a blurred white dot. Nothing helpful. I lowered the phone and looked back up. The blinking stopped. The light stayed on, steady, normal star bright, so I thought maybe it had just coincidentally changed. A dimming effect or something atmospheric. But then it moved. It moved so fast that at first I wasn't sure I'd actually seen motion. Just a shift, no trail, no fade, no jerkiness. 1 second it was next to Cassiopeia, the next it was farther to the right, crossing a big chunk of sky in a perfectly straight line. "Did you see that?" Jenna whispered. I could only nod. I felt something deep in my gut, the kind of feeling that hits before you understand it. Just this sudden certainty that the night wasn't normal anymore. The light kept going in that straight line, neither rising nor falling, not curving like a satellite. It didn't speed up or slow down. It just moved, steady and deliberate, like it had a destination that wasn't anywhere near us. After about 10 seconds, it stopped again, perfectly still. I counted silently in my head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 7 seconds. Then the blinking started again. 3 short flashes. Pause. 1 long. Jenna slid off the hood of the car and stood next to me. "That's not a plane," she said. "That's not anything I know." The temperature felt like it had dropped. I don't know if it really did, or if I just suddenly became more aware of how still the air was. My breath was turning into a thick, white puff, more than it should have for the temperature we'd started with. The star blinked through its pattern one more time. Then it shot straight upward. Not angled, straight vertical, like someone pulling a string taut. It moved fast, faster than before. I tracked it until it was barely visible, then not at all. And that should have been the end of it. But the sky didn't go back to normal. Not right away. I noticed it first. A faint shimmer around the spot where the light had vanished. Not bright, just a distortion, like heat rising off the hood of a car, except it was 30 degrees out. The distortion grew wider, spreading like the air was bending. The stars behind it wavered and rippled, sliding out of place for a second. Then everything snapped back. The sky was still again. Perfectly still. No shimmer, no blinking, no motion. I tried to say something, some joke about satellites or optical illusions, but the words caught in my throat. My chest felt tight, like my body knew something my mind didn't want to accept. Jenna got back onto the hood so slowly you'd think it was covered in ice. She didn't speak. She just stared at the place where the light had been. I finally said, "Let's just wait a minute. Maybe it'll come back." She didn't answer. She just took the thermos from beside her and drank without looking down. We sat there for what felt like a long time. My phone said it had been 7 minutes, but I'm not convinced that was right. It felt both shorter and longer in that strange way where your brain loses its grip on time. No more blinking, no more movement, just ordinary stars in an ordinary sky. Eventually Jenna said, "Let's go, please." Her voice didn't sound like her voice. Not scared exactly, quiet, like she was trying not to disturb something. We got in her car and drove back into town. Every streetlight felt too bright. Every shadow felt too dark. The whole ride home, I kept checking the sky through the windshield, waiting to see the blinking start again. Nothing did. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment when the star stopped blinking and began moving, smooth and silent, like it was gliding on rails. The next morning, Jenna texted me just 2 words: never again. We didn't go back to that spot after dark for months, and sometimes when the sky is perfectly clear and still, I'll look up and find that same place near Cassiopeia. Everything will look normal, but every once in a while I think I see a flicker, not random, just faint enough to wonder if it's starting again. I first saw the glow just past midnight, cutting along Willow Terrace on my way back from my friend Mason's place. The fog was thick enough that the streetlights looked like dull orange smudges instead of actual lights. I had my hands shoved in my jacket pockets and my head down because the air felt colder than it should have for September. The kind of cold that sinks into your sleeves. I didn't notice anything weird until the glow slid across the fog above me. It wasn't bright, more like someone holding a red flashlight behind a bedsheet. Soft, diffused, too even to be headlights or a passing taillight reflection. It hovered maybe 30 feet up, right over the middle of the street. I stopped because it didn't move like anything I could explain. The shape wasn't clear through the fog, but the glow had a roundness to it, a smooth edge. It wasn't spreading or flickering, just sitting there. At first I thought it was some kind of weird drone, maybe a hobbyist messing around late, but drones buzz. Even the quiet ones make that insect hum. This thing didn't make a sound, and it didn't blink or dim like a battery was dying. It just stayed. I stood under a street lamp and stared up into the fog. The red glow pulsed once, very gently, like it was taking a slow breath. I actually stepped back. I didn't want to, but my legs did it for me. After that small pulse, the glow drifted a few feet sideways. Not fast, more like it was sliding across ice. It kept the same height, the same shape. The fog didn't break around it, didn't swirl or get disturbed like it should have if something solid was passing through it. That part bothered me more than the glow itself. I kept walking, trying to act normal, even though I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. As I moved, the glow shifted too, keeping ahead of me by maybe 20 yards. That's when I started thinking I was imagining it. The fog was playing tricks on me. Lights were reflecting from traffic somewhere behind me, except there weren't any cars. The whole street was empty. Even the houses looked dark, like everyone had gone to bed hours ago. I walked another block, and glow stayed with me, always ahead, always at the same distance. At one point, it dipped slightly, and I swear I felt the temperature drop another few degrees. I didn't know if I should turn back or cut through someone's yard to get out of the open, but moving felt safer than standing still. The fog made the neighborhood feel smaller, quieter. Sounds got swallowed up. Even my own footsteps felt muted. About halfway down the next block, I noticed something else. All the porch lights were off. Every single one. Usually at least a few houses leave them on, especially the corner units. But tonight, every bulb looked dead. I know that doesn't prove anything, but it fed into the paranoia. It felt like the whole street was emptied out, so I'd be the only one to see the glow. The red shape drifted a little higher, maybe 5 or 6 feet. Then it paused again. I don't know why, but that pause was somehow worse than when it moved. It felt like waiting, like it was deciding something. I told myself, out loud, quietly, it's nothing, just fog doing weird fog stuff, saying it didn't help at all. I crossed onto Maplewood Lane. My house was 3 more blocks up near the bend. I speed walked without trying to look like I was panicking. The glow kept pace, higher now, but still visible through the low fog. Then something happened that made my skin crawl. The fog thinned for maybe half a second, just enough for me to see that the glow wasn't reflecting off anything. It was something. A round shape, faint with a smooth outline that didn't match anything familiar, just hovering without any visible structure holding it up. And when the fog closed back in, the glow looked brighter, like the shape had moved slightly closer again. I didn't stop walking, but every muscle in my body tensed. I kept glancing behind me, thinking maybe this thing was just a weird projection from a car or house light, but nothing was behind me except thick fog and a row of dark houses. I reached the small park near my street, the one with the wooden bench and sad-looking chain-link fence. The glow paused again at the corner, much higher now, like it was rising with the slope of the hill. For a moment, everything got unnaturally still. The fog didn't move, the trees didn't sway, even the hum from the power lines overhead seemed muted. That's when I heard it. Not a noise exactly, more like a vibration in the air. A faint thrum that I felt in my chest more than in my ears. It wasn't steady. It fluttered like something struggling to start up. It made my ribs feel tight. The glow flickered slightly, not like a normal light, but like it blurred around the edges. I whispered, "What are you?" Then the glow rose straight up, fast but not instantly. It ascended through the fog like it was being pulled by a cable. The fog around it brightened as it passed through, just then dimmed again once it was higher. A few seconds later, it stopped rising and hovered just below the low cloud ceiling. The thrum faded. My chest felt lighter again. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe it would vanish, and I could convince myself it was some trick of the weather. But then it moved sideways again, sliding above the street in a straight, deliberate line. Not drifting, not bobbing like a balloon, just gliding with purpose. It reached the edge of the park, hesitated, and then shot upward into the cloud bank. The fog lit up faint red for a moment, like a watercolor stain blooming across paper. Then everything went back to normal. The dim streetlights, the damp fog, the quiet. I stood there breathing hard, trying to hear anything that might tell me where it went. A breeze, a drone motor, an engine, anything. There was nothing. I didn't run home, but I walked fast enough that my shoes scraped louder against the sidewalk than they had all night. When I reached my house, I fumbled the keys, trying to unlock the door. My hands shook more than I realized. Inside, everything looked normal. My living room lamp was still on. My dog, Ellie, lifted her head from the couch, but didn't bark like she usually does when I come in late. She just stared at me, ears up, like she sensed something had followed me home. I pulled the curtains shut, even though I usually don't bother. I didn't want to look outside again. Later, when I tried to fall asleep, I kept replaying the moment when the fog thinned and I saw the outline, smooth, round, too even to be anything mechanical, I recognized. But the part that sticks with me the most is the feeling right before it ascended into the clouds, that heavy stillness, like the air was waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. Everything stayed quiet. But walking through that same stretch of street now, even on clear nights, I catch myself checking the sky for that soft red glow, half hoping it won't be there, half expecting it to appear again just ahead of me, keeping the same careful distance. It started while I was in the kitchen washing a pan. That's usually when I play music, late at night, doing cleanup, but I'd turned everything off because my head hurt. The house was quiet except for the sink running and the hum of the fridge. It was almost midnight, a cold early winter night where the windows fog from the inside no matter how low you set the heat. I heard the tone before I realized what it was. A clean, steady note, maybe 2 or 3 seconds long, repeated evenly. At first I thought it was coming from outside, someone's car alarm malfunctioning or maybe a distant generator. But the sound felt too close, sharper, more directed. I turned off the sink and just listened. The tone kept going, soft but pure, almost like something from a hearing test. That's when I recognized it, the little tabletop radio in my living room. I hadn't touched that thing in weeks. It wasn't even plugged into any smart system. It was just a cheap, old-school AM/FM radio I kept near the window so I could listen to road alerts during storms. I dried my hands on my shirt and walked into the living room. Sure enough, the radio was on. The screen showed a frequency I didn't recognize. Something between stations, definitely not where I'd left it. The tone didn't sound like broadcast static or interference. It was too clean, too precise. A single pitch held perfectly steady. I stood there watching it, trying to figure out if maybe the power had flickered earlier and turned it on somehow. But the lights were all normal. Nothing else had reset. The tone continued, completely unbroken. I said, "Okay, what the hell?" under my breath and took a step toward the radio. The moment I crossed the center of the room, the tone stopped. Not faded, not cut out with static, just gone, like someone took their finger off a key. Every light in the house flickered once, just a quick dim and brightening. The fridge compressor clicked off, then back on. The clock on the microwave stayed correct, so it wasn't a real outage. I stood there frozen. For some reason, the silence after the tone died felt heavier than the sound itself. My ears rang a little. The radio screen still glowed though, same weird frequency, no sound. I waited a full minute before I walked over to it. When I reached out to hit the power button, a weird thing happened. The screen flickered right before my finger touched it. Not the whole radio, just the display, like someone had blown across an old digital clock. I turned it off anyway. The click felt normal. The radio fell dark. That should have been the end of it. Strange, but explainable. Faulty wiring, maybe. Some kind of random power surge, except the house still felt wrong afterward. That sounds dramatic, but it's the best way I can put it. The quiet wasn't the same quiet I lived with every night. It felt thick, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. I went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning, but my hands shook while I scrubbed the pan. I kept listening for the tone to return. It didn't. I tried to brush it off and went upstairs to get ready for bed. That's when I noticed another weird thing. My hallway was darker than usual. Not darker because the lights were out, they were on, both of them. But the light seemed weak. Duller, like the bulbs were older than they should have been. I stood under one and looked up. The bulb was the same LED I'd installed 2 months earlier. No dimming, no flickering. Still, the hallway felt shadowy in a way that didn't make sense. I went into my room and shut the door. Before getting into bed, I checked my phone. The time was fine, but the battery percentage had dropped 10% since I'd left it charging. The little charging icon was still there. My charger cord is old, so I didn't think much of it. I tried to sleep. For about an hour, nothing happened. The house stayed quiet, the kind of quiet you eventually adjust to. I started drifting off. Then the tone started again. This time it wasn't coming from downstairs. It sounded like it was coming through the floorboards. Faint, muffled, but definitely the same pitch. I sat up instantly. It pulsed every few seconds, steady as a metronome. My walls didn't vibrate, but the tone felt present in the room, like it moved with the air instead of through it. I got out of bed and opened the door. The tone didn't get louder when I stepped into the hallway. It felt level, like it wasn't coming from a specific direction at all. Halfway down the hall, the lights dimmed again. Not flickering. Dimming, like someone turned the switch down just a hair, then back up. I stopped walking. My bedroom door behind me creaked slightly, even though I hadn't touched it. The tone didn't react. It kept going. I went downstairs cautiously, expecting the radio to be on again. When I reached the living room, the radio was still off. The plug was still in the wall. Nothing moved, nothing lit up, but the tone didn't stop. It felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. I turned in place, trying to pinpoint it. It didn't change. It was everywhere at once. Same volume, same pitch, same spacing. My heartbeat felt uneven. Then every light in the house flickered again, harder this time. The living room lamp went dark for a solid second before coming back. The ceiling light stuttered like it was losing power. The fridge clicked off again, and then for the first time the tone wavered. Just a tiny shift, almost like a bend. Not higher or lower, just tilted, like the sound had turned in the air. That broke me. I backed up toward the stairs. I didn't want to run, but something about that moment made me feel like being downstairs was a bad idea. Halfway up the stairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket, one single vibration. When I pulled it out, the screen was on, but blank, completely white. No icons, no lock screen, just a white glow. Then the tone cut off again. The house went dead quiet. The phone screen blinked off, the focus then restarted normally like nothing had happened. I turned around from the stairwell and listened for several minutes. No tone, no flicker. The fridge hummed back on normally. The ambient silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt normal again. Safe, even. I stayed awake until about 3, just sitting on the couch with every light on, waiting to see if the tone returned. It didn't. Eventually, exhaustion beat out the fear, and I went back upstairs. The lights stayed bright. My phone behaved. The hallway looked normal again. I slept in short bursts and woke at sunrise. The house felt perfectly ordinary in the daylight. Too ordinary. Like whatever had happened depended on the dark. I checked the radio first thing. It was still off, still tuning to the normal FM station I'd left it on earlier in the week. I plugged it in, turned it on, and ran through the frequencies one by one. All normal sound. No tone. I unplugged it and set it back down. For the rest of the day, nothing strange happened. The lights didn't flicker. The microwave clock stayed steady. My phone battery behaved. The silence felt like actual silence instead of that charged buzzing pressure from the night before. But I still don't like walking past that radio after dark. Half expecting the display to glow on its own again, half listening for that clean, steady tone to slip through the walls like it's testing something. It hasn't happened since, but whenever the house gets quiet enough, I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for it to start again. The first time I saw it, I'd been in the air for a little over an hour. I was flying a late cargo run in a Cessna Caravan from Boise to Sacramento, something I'd done hundreds of times. It was just past 11, a clear night, barely any turbulence. The kind of flight where you usually settle into a rhythm, check gauges, monitor comms, sip coffee that tastes like burnt dust, and hope the headwinds stay mild. I remember hearing my own breathing louder than usual, which was strange considering the drone of the engine. Sometimes long flights mess with your perception like that. You get inside your own head. I was passing over a stretch of forested foothills when I noticed a light off my right wing. At first, I thought it was another aircraft, maybe someone cruising at a similar altitude on a parallel route. But the light didn't blink. It didn't behave like any nav lights I knew. It was a steady white glow, small but sharp, and it kept perfect pace with me. I checked my altimeter, I checked my GPS, everything looked normal. The light stayed at the same relative distance, maybe a few hundred yards out, close enough that I should have seen shape or structure behind it. But all I saw was the glow. Boise Center, Caravan 4689er, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Do you have any traffic off my right side? A few seconds of quiet, just static hiss. 4689er. Negative contact. No traffic in your vicinity. I looked again, still there, unblinking, dead still relative to me. If I banked even slightly, the thing adjusted perfectly. I thought maybe fatigue was screwing with my depth perception. I pulled my eyes away from it, counted to 3, looked back. It felt closer, not by much, maybe 20 yards, but it felt like it. And right then, the cabin lights flickered, all of them. Not a violent surge, just a soft dimming, like someone slid a brightness dial down and up again. Boise Center, I'm seeing some kind of light pacing me. I've got electrical flickers in the cabin. Say again? They asked. Before I could answer, the cabin lights dipped again. A longer fade this time, maybe 2 full seconds. My stomach clenched like the air pressure had dropped, but the instruments didn't show anything unusual. I tilted the yoke slightly, testing it. The light matched me instantly. Aircraft don't do that. Not without me seeing wings, structure, something. I kept my voice steady. Center, is there any kind of atmospheric interference in my area? 4689er, conditions are reported calm. The light edged closer. Just a little, maybe another 20 yards. Enough that it felt intentional. Cabin lights dimmed a 3rd time. This one was the longest yet. Everything inside the cockpit went from warm yellow to almost pitch black for about 3 seconds. The instrument panel held steady, no loss of power there, but the internal lighting dipped to nothing. During that blackout, the glow outside my window looked brighter, or maybe it actually was brighter. It was hard to tell through the glass in the dark. I felt something in my chest, not fear exactly, more like a deep, hollow pressure as if someone pressed a fist against my sternum from the inside. Not painful, just wrong. The cabin lights came back. I blinked a few times, trying to clear the weird haze from my eyes. The object hadn't moved. It stayed locked in that fixed distance, like it was tethered to me. I asked Center again if they could see anything on radar. Negative, they said. No targets except you. I didn't respond right away. I was trying to decide whether to climb, descend, or hold course. The idea of turning toward the thing made my skin crawl, but turning away felt pointless. How do you outmaneuver something that shadows every move? I chose altitude, a slow climb. The object climbed with me, perfectly synchronized. Cabin lights dimmed again. This time, the dim took longer to resolve. 5 seconds, maybe 6. And during that time, the glow outside flared fiercely. Not in brightness exactly, but in clarity. It sharpened, forming a sort of soft-edged circle. A disc? Maybe. Hard to say. The edges were too clean, too even, to be a natural reflection. I caught myself gripping the yoke too tight and forced my hands to relax. 4689er, Center said. Your transponder just blinked. Do you copy? Copy, I said. Everything's mostly stable on my end. I didn't want to say more. Not while it was still right there. I leveled out and the object leveled out with me, still holding that awful fixed distance. I could feel it now. Not physically, but in that hard-to-explain sense of awareness. Like I could tell it was watching me, though that made no logical sense. Then it drifted closer, just a bit, maybe 10 yards. The cabin lights dimmed again, hard enough that the overhead panel clicked softly, like the bulbs were straining. The pressure in my chest tightened. I didn't speak, didn't breathe, didn't move. The glow hovered there, steady as a heartbeat. Then something changed. Not visually, nothing about the light itself shifted, but the air in the cockpit felt thicker, like humidity rising fast. My ears popped twice in quick succession. A faint hum started somewhere behind me, so low I wasn't sure it was real. The glow crept closer by another few yards. The lights dimmed to nearly nothing. I expected fear to hit me full force, but instead there was this strange numbness, like my brain refused to process it fully. My vision tunneled. The hum intensified, not louder, just deeper. I opened my mouth to call center, but no sound came out. For 5 or 6 long seconds, everything felt suspended, like the aircraft wasn't moving, like I wasn't breathing, like the glow outside was the only living thing in the sky. Then, without warning, the cabin lights flicked back to full brightness. The pressure vanished, the hum stopped, and the glow was farther away. Not gone, just farther, a few hundred yards this time. I stared at it, afraid to blink. It didn't move, it didn't pulse, it didn't fade. It just held that new distance, as if something had changed its mind. I tried to radio center. Object is, it's moved farther from me. Say again, they said, like they hadn't heard me properly. And maybe they hadn't. My voice sounded faint, even to my own ears. I flew in silence after that. I kept glancing over at the thing every few seconds, but it just trailed me at that larger distance. No more flickering, no more pressure, no more dimming lights. 10 minutes later, exactly 10 minutes, according to my clock, the glow began rising, slowly at first, then faster, straight up, like it was being pulled on a string. It climbed until it was a tiny speck. Then it winked out, not faded, disappeared, just gone. I told center I'd lost sight of the light. They acknowledged it like I'd reported seeing a shooting star, routine, casual. The rest of the flight was normal, perfect even. The landing in Sacramento was smooth. Offloading the cargo felt strangely grounding. Like it pulled me back into reality. But the whole time I felt this lingering pressure in my chest, a ghost of the sensation from earlier. I didn't write an official report about it. I knew how it would sound. Unidentified light pacing aircraft caused electrical anomalies. Not something I wanted attached to my name or my license. I went back home the next morning, slept until noon. When I woke up, the pressure in my chest was gone. But sometimes, when I'm flying at night and the cabin lights flicker, just for a moment, I find myself glancing out the right side window expecting that steady white glow to be there again. So far it hasn't been. But the part that bothers me is how precisely it held that distance, how closely it watched every tiny adjustment I made, like it already knew what I was going to do before I did it. The light first showed up somewhere past midnight, about an hour after we'd left Elko heading east. There were maybe 9 of us on the bus, most asleep, and the driver, a guy named Carl, according to the little placard above his seat, hadn't said a word since we pulled out of the station. I'd taken the last row so I could stretch out, but the rattling ceiling vent above me wouldn't close all the way, so every few minutes a cold draft hit the top of my head. I remember looking out the window just to have something to focus on besides the hum of the engine. It was pitch black out there, nothing but long stretches of open desert broken up by old fence lines and the occasional cattle gate. And then I saw it. A single point of white light hovering way back in the distance. My first thought was another car cresting a hill, but it wasn't moving right. It stayed in the same spot in the glass like it was pacing us. I leaned closer, trying to figure out if it was some kind of reflection from inside the bus. But the overhead lights were off. The aisle lights were dim, yellow, uneven. Nothing inside could have made that kind of clean, sharp white. The bus bounced over a rough patch in the road, and the light stayed perfectly steady. I didn't think much of it for maybe a minute, just stared at it, watching for any kind of wobble or flicker, anything that would make it make sense. But it just stayed there, keeping the same distance no matter how fast or slow we were going. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I unbuckled, walked up a few rows, and tapped the shoulder of a woman who'd been awake the whole ride. Her name was Paula. She'd told me earlier she was heading to Omaha for a family thing. She looked annoyed at the interruption, but when I pointed out the window, she leaned across the empty seat next to her. "What are you trying to show me?" she whispered. "That light," I said. She squinted. At first, I thought she couldn't see it. Then she blinked a few times, frowning. That's not a car." "No," I said. She straightened up and looked toward the front of the bus, like she was going to say something to the driver, but then she hesitated and sat back down. I didn't blame her. It sounded dumb the second you tried to explain it. I went back to my seat, but I couldn't stop checking the window every few seconds. The light wasn't growing or shrinking, just following. Around 12:40, Carl's voice came over the intercom, startling everyone awake. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making a brief stop up ahead. Everything's fine, just checking something on the bus. His voice had this forced calm to it. It didn't sound like a guy who just wanted to stretch his legs. People groaned, sat up, checked phones that barely had signal out there. The light didn't move. When Carl slowed down, the light slowed too. I watched it fall back a little as we dipped into a shallow valley, then rise again when the road climbed. Always the same distance, always the same brightness. We finally pulled onto a gravel turnout beside a cluster of scrub bushes. No lights nearby, not even a distant ranch, just darkness. Carl stood up, adjusting his cap, and nodded toward us. "Just give me a few minutes," he said. "Stay on board, please." He stepped off, letting the door hiss shut behind him. I moved up a couple rows for a better view. Paula joined me, standing in the aisle. A young guy in headphones, looked like his name should have been Evan, though I never asked, pulled his hood down and stared out too. The light hovered there, maybe a quarter mile back now. Still. Too still. Carl walked to the front of the bus, doing this exaggerated inspection of the headlights, like he was giving us something to look at. But he kept glancing behind him toward the ridge on the right side of the road. Every few seconds, he'd lift his chin like he was trying to get a better view. "What the hell is that?" Paula whispered. None of us answered. Then it happened fast. The light jittered once, almost imperceptibly, and dropped behind the low hill beside the highway. Not drifted, not glided. Dropped, straight down. Like someone hit a switch, it vanished instantly. Carl froze where he was. I could see the tension in his shoulders, even from inside the bus. He slowly walked to the door, stepped up, and closed it fast. He didn't sit right away. He scanned the windows, checking the darkness outside like he expected something else to appear. After a long 10 seconds, he finally sat down, gripped the wheel, and muttered something under his breath. Then the bus lurched forward harder than necessary, gravel spitting out from under the tires. No one talked for a while after that. I kept looking back out the window, expecting the light to reappear at any moment. Maybe from behind another rise or streaking across the sky. But the desert stayed dark, completely empty. The stars looked normal. The highway behind us was blank. About 20 minutes later, the bus lights flickered once. A quick pulse. Not enough to shut anything off, but enough for everyone to notice. Carl tapped the dashboard, muttered another curse, and kept driving. I didn't sleep the rest of the ride. Every time we passed a reflective road sign, I flinched, thinking the light had come back. Every wide open stretch of highway made me feel exposed, like there was too much sky above us. Even Paula, who'd seemed skeptical at first, kept her eyes fixed on the windows instead of trying to nap again. When we finally pulled into the Salt Lake City station around 3 a.m., Carl stood by the door as everyone got off. He wasn't smiling. He didn't make any small talk. When I stepped down, he touched my arm lightly. "You saw it too, right?" he said. I nodded. "What do you think it was?" He looked past me toward the empty darkness behind the station building, like he expected to see that same hovering point appear there. "I've been driving this route for 19 years, never seen anything move like that." "That's not an answer," I said quietly. He shook his head. "Because I don't have one." For a half second, I thought he was going to ask me not to talk about it. Or maybe tell me something he'd heard from other drivers. But he didn't say anything else. Just stepped back onto the bus and shut the door. I watched him pull away, taillights fading into the night. I never saw that light again. Not on the ride home a week later, not on any night drives since. But sometimes when I catch headlights in my rearview mirror staying just a bit too steady, my stomach tightens. I wait to see if they'll rise or fall or blink, just to prove they're real. My phone's compass started going crazy about 15 minutes after I turned off the main highway. I was on one of those narrow country roads outside of Tulare, the kind where the fields go on forever, and the only lights are distant farmhouses or the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. It was late, close to 1 a.m., and I was coming back from visiting a friend in Visalia. I don't know why I even had the compass open. I guess I was just checking if I'd missed a turn somewhere. At first, I thought the phone was glitching. The little red arrow spun all the way around, paused, then whipped back the other way like it was stuck on something. I tapped the screen twice. The arrow kept jittering, pointing in every direction except the actual one I was facing. I slowed down and held the phone up in front of me just to make sure I wasn't bumping it around. Still spinning. My signal bars were dead, not low, gone completely. That wasn't unusual for the area, but the compass thing threw me. I remember saying, "Okay, that's weird," out loud, and that's when I noticed something through the windshield. It was small at first, a bright point of light near the horizon, just above the tops of the distant orchards. I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't moving the way a plane should. It drifted sideways, not angled, sideways, parallel to the ground, slow and smooth, like someone sliding a coin across a table. I pulled off onto the dirt shoulder without really thinking. Dust rose around the car, lit by my headlights. The object was still there. It didn't blink or pulse, just a steady white glow, maybe the size of a bright star, but too low and too clear to be one. I turned off the radio to hear better, which was pointless because there was nothing to hear. Just the engine idling, the faint ticking from the cooling vents, and this strange quiet that felt heavier than any normal night out there. The light slid a few inches across the horizon, then stopped. For a moment, I genuinely thought it might be a drone. People film fields all the time. Maybe someone was checking irrigation or doing night mapping or whatever farmers do with drones now. But I'd never seen one move like that, smooth, controlled, with no noise at all. I opened the car door and stepped out. The cold hit me fast. There was a sharp breeze coming off the fields, carrying that dusty smell the Central Valley always has at night. I leaned against the door and watched the light. It started drifting again. Same sideways motion, slow as before. I tried to line it up with something in the distance, a tree, a fence, anything, to see how far away it might have been. It was hard to tell. It looked like it was miles out, but still too bright to be that far. I held up my phone again. The compass arrow spun even faster now, making full circles without pausing. I tried to film the light, but the camera wouldn't focus. The screen kept blurring in and out like I was shaking, even though I wasn't. Then the object stopped a second time. This time, it stayed still long enough for me to really look at it. The glow was white, but not like a bulb or LED. It didn't flare or bleed around the edges. The edges were sharp, defined, like the light belonged to a solid shape I couldn't see. I realized then that everything around me had gone quiet. Not quiet as in no cars or coyotes, quiet like the air itself wasn't moving anymore. The breeze had stopped. The insects had stopped. I couldn't hear anything except the soft hum of my engine. I shut the engine off. The silence got even heavier. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like someone pressed their hands over my ears, but without the pressure. The light jerked. Not much, just a tiny sharp movement upward. A jump, almost. But it was the first time it had moved in anything other than that slow slide. My chest tightened. I thought about getting back in the car, but something kept me watching. It slid sideways again, but this time faster. Then it slowed, then sped up. The motion didn't feel random, not exactly. More like it was following invisible lines. My compass arrow spun so fast the phone vibrated. I lowered it, and when I looked back at the horizon, the object wasn't where it had been. It was higher now. Not far, but noticeably, maybe a few degrees. I blinked, and in that blink, it moved again. Not a jump this time, just a quick shift to the left, almost like it had been waiting for me to look away. Something about that made my stomach twist, like whatever it was didn't want its movement seen closely. I backed up toward my car door without turning around. The gravel crunched under my shoes. That tiny sound felt too loud in the dead air. Just before I got in, the light started drifting toward me. Not directly, more diagonally, like it was closing the distance but keeping low above the orchards. It didn't speed up or get erratic. It came in the same slow glide it had used before, like it had all the time in the world. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door quietly, even though I knew that didn't matter. The object kept drifting closer. I watched it through the windshield, trying not to panic. My breathing got fast enough to fog the glass. I decided to start the car, even if it meant breaking the silence. The engine turned over normally. The light paused. I don't mean it stopped drifting. I mean it paused midair, like someone pressed a button that froze it in place. My headlights caught dust floating in the still air. The object didn't move an inch. I put the car in drive and eased forward. The object rose. just a little, like it was adjusting. I pressed the gas harder. The tires spun a moment in the loose dirt before finding traction. I pulled back onto the road faster than I meant to. My hands were shaking so badly I almost veered into the grass on the other side. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The object was behind me now, still hovering in the same spot above the orchards. It didn't chase me. It didn't move. It just stayed there, perfectly still, like it was watching. My compass arrow finally stopped spinning. It pointed steadily north as if nothing had happened. I didn't look back again. I drove until I hit the first gas station on the edge of town. Only then did I let myself breathe normally. I parked under the bright canopy lights and checked the sky. Nothing. Just stars and a faint haze from the city. My phone had full signal again, compass working perfectly. I waited there for almost 20 minutes, half expecting that white light to drift over the fields toward the station, steady as ever. It didn't. On the rest of the drive home, I kept checking the mirrors, scanning the horizon, watching for any sideways drift or sudden shift of white against the dark. Nothing followed. Nothing reappeared. But the compass thing stuck with me more than the light did. I've used that road a dozen times since, and the compass has never acted like that again. It only happened in those exact minutes, on that exact stretch of road, right before I saw something drifting sideways through the sky, like it wasn't bound to the same rules everything else is. I don't leave the main highway at night anymore. There's no reason to risk driving past that spot again. I woke up because my room felt colder than it should have. Not winter cold, I live in Coeur d'Alene, so I know actual cold, but the kind where the air feels wrong, too sharp for the temperature outside. I pulled the blankets tighter around me and noticed the faintest shimmer across the window, like someone had run a light across it. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and stared. A thin layer of frost covered the inside of the glass. Inside. I could see the condensation on the outside too, but the frost was definitely on my side. It covered almost the entire window, except for a small, perfectly round, clear spot in the center. Not smudged, not melted, just a circle the size of a coin, crisp-edged and untouched. I hadn't been breathing anywhere near the window. I sleep on the opposite side of the room. The heat had been running earlier that night, so it made no sense. I swung my legs out of bed, and the wood floor felt colder than usual, like the chill had sunk into it. I walked over to the window, standing a little to the side because I had this weird feeling that if I stood directly in front of that clear spot, something would be on the other side looking back. The frost was so thin I could see the street lamp outside bleeding a warm blur through it. I reached out and touched the glass lightly. My fingertip came away damp and cold. Normal frost. But when I leaned in toward the clear spot, the glass didn't fog from my breath. It stayed perfectly clear. That's what made my stomach knot up. I backed away and grabbed my phone to check the time. 3:47 a.m. I hadn't heard anything, no knocks, no weird noises, nothing that should have woken me. I live alone in a small rental house at the end of a cul-de-sac tucked between two bigger properties. Quiet place. Nothing much happens there. I checked the thermostat next. It said 67 degrees, same as always at night. No drop, no malfunction. I even put my hand over the vent. The air flowing out was warm. The window was the only cold thing in the room. I went around the house, turning on lights, half embarrassed even though no one was there to see me freaking out. Living room, kitchen, hallway, all normal. No drafts, no open doors or windows. When I walked back into the bedroom, the frost hadn't changed. Same thin layer, same perfect circle. I considered wiping the window clean, but stopped myself. I don't know why. Curiosity maybe, or fear that erasing it would somehow make things worse. I peeked outside instead. The street was dead still. No cars, no wind. The branches on the pine tree across the road weren't moving at all. The neighbor's yard light was on, lighting up the gravel path beside their shed, but there was no sign of anyone. I went back to bed eventually, though sleep wasn't the right word. I lay there watching the window until the frost started to melt with the sunrise. But that perfect circle stayed there longer than the rest, almost like it resisted the warmth. It finally faded sometime around 7. I figured that would be the end of it, but the next night something else happened. I had the curtains closed that time. I didn't want to see the glass. But around 2 a.m., I heard a soft crackle from the direction of the window, like the sound ice makes when it shifts or breaks apart. Not loud, just enough to cut through the quiet of the house. I froze and listened. It came again, a tiny crisp sound. I got up slowly, feeling that same unnatural chill in the air. I reached out and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. The window was clear, no frost, but the glass looked off. Not cracked, not fogged, just distorted, like the surface was bending light in a way it shouldn't. Then it stopped. The distortion smoothed out like it had never been there. Nothing else happened that night. I started checking the window before bed after that. For 3 days, everything seemed normal. The weather warmed up during the afternoons, so frost shouldn't have formed anyway. I convinced myself it had just been one of those weird temperature flukes houses get sometimes. Then the 4th night came. I fell asleep on the couch watching a late movie. I only woke up when the TV made a soft clicking noise like it was trying to turn itself off, but couldn't. The screen was still lit. The room was warm from the fireplace. Nothing strange, until I stood up. I heard something in the bedroom. Not loud, more like a faint, rhythmic tapping. Not steady tapping like a person. It was too soft and too irregular for that. Almost like static. I thought maybe something had fallen or an animal was brushing against the outside wall. I walked down the hall and pushed my bedroom door open carefully. The frost was back. A thin, perfect sheet across the whole interior window again, just like the first night. The same round, clear spot in the center. But this time, the frost wasn't still. It was forming, actively forming. I could see tiny crystals spreading outward from the edges, like they were growing toward the middle. I stepped into the room and my breath turned visible, even though the air wasn't cold enough for that. The little cloud of condensation hung there for a second before fading. I walked closer to the window, not sure why. I think I needed to know if the clear spot had returned exactly as before. It had. Perfect circle. No smudges. I raised my hand toward the glass, stopping just an inch away. The cold radiating off the window felt unnatural, too sharp, too focused, like the frost had a temperature separate from the room. Then something happened that made every hair on my arms rise. The clear spot pulsed, just once. A tiny dimming and brightening of the streetlight behind it, as if the glass itself flickered. The frost didn't move, the light didn't move, only the clear circle changed. I jerked my hand back and stumbled a step. The tapping sound returned, muffled against the window pane. I realized then that it was coming from inside the double-pane glass, not the inside surface, inside the sealed space between the 2 panes. There's no way for anything to get in there. I turned and left the room fast, leaving the door open behind me. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the wall until I felt steady enough to go back in. When I did, the frost had stopped spreading. The clear spot was still there, unchanged. Right then, I wiped my hand across the glass. The frost smeared under my palm. It melted instantly from the heat of my skin. But that clear circle didn't smear. It didn't fog. It didn't react at all. By sunrise, the frost was gone again. The circle wasn't. It lingered faintly for hours, almost like an afterimage burned into the glass. I moved a week later. I didn't tell the landlord anything except that I'd accepted a job in Spokane. It wasn't true, but I needed a reason. I didn't want to sleep in that room again. I didn't want to see frost forming in a place it shouldn't or hear sounds from a sealed window. I still think about it though. Not the frost, not the tapping, the pulse, that tiny dimming, like whatever made that perfect circle was responding to me standing there. Sometimes I check the windows in my new place in the middle of the night. Not for frost, just for that circle. So far, nothing. But every now and then the air feels colder than the thermostat says it should, and I catch myself staring at the glass, waiting for something to appear. It happened late in August, on one of those warm nights where the air feels heavy even after the sun goes down. I'd been sitting on my porch in Bellamont, this tiny town outside Flagstaff, just letting the day drain out of me. I had a folding chair leaned back against the railing, a glass of water sweating on the table beside me, and not much on my mind. The cicadas were still going, though they slowed whenever the breeze picked up. I wasn't doing anything special, just sitting there like I always did before bed, I looked up for no particular reason. I do that sometimes, just stare at the sky, checking which stars are out. The porch faces south, so I get a pretty clear view once the neighborhood lights settle down. There's one star I always notice because it hangs almost directly above the pine behind my mailbox. I don't know the constellation names. I just know that star is usually the brightest one. That night, it got brighter. Not gradually, like when a plane passes and catches sunlight. More like someone turned a dimmer switch up on it fast. 1 second it was this normal white pinprick, and the next it was glaring, not blinding, but way too bright for a star, like it had swollen. I sat forward in the chair without thinking. My first reaction was that maybe it was a flare, but it wasn't moving. It hung in the exact same spot, and the light didn't flicker. It just sat there, burning in that steady, almost clinical way. Then it shrank, not faded, shrank. The brightness pulled inward, collapsing into itself until it was back to the tiny point it had been before. Maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. The sky around it didn't change. Nothing else brightened or dimmed. It was like only that one point of light had been touched. My porch light went out a moment later. It didn't flicker. It didn't buzz. It just snapped off like the switch had been flipped from inside the house. The rest of the street kept its glow. I could still see the street lamp by the Reynolds place down the road, but my porch was suddenly in total shadow. I stood up, instinctively reaching toward the bulb to steady myself, even though I knew I couldn't reach it from where I was. When I glanced back up at the sky, the star looked normal, too normal. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to do something again. It didn't. I went inside to grab a spare bulb because I was sure it had just blown. But when I came back out and twisted the cover off, the bulb was cool to the touch, not warm like it should have been. I'd had the light on for at least an hour. I replaced it anyway. Still nothing. I flipped the porch switch inside the house twice, 3 times. No response. I checked the breaker box in the laundry room. All switches were lined up fine. Nothing had tripped. Everything inside the house still worked. The fridge hummed, the AC, the overhead lights. Just the porch light was dead. I stood inside the doorway, staring at the sky again. I couldn't shake the feeling that the timing hadn't been coincidence. The star brightened, collapsed, and the very next moment my porch light died. My heart was beating faster than it should have for something so small. I went back to my chair and sat down, even though the dark around me felt heavier now. The cicadas had stopped entirely. Usually they taper off when a breeze comes through, but the air had gone still. The quiet pressed into my ears like I'd stepped into a basement. I told myself I was just noticing the silence because of the weird light thing, but the longer I sat, the stranger it felt. Across the road, the Lehman's dog Jasper gave one low bark. Just one. And then nothing more. He usually goes on forever if something sets him off. I listened for a while, hoping he'd bark again, but the neighborhood stayed unnaturally calm. I tilted back and stared at the star again. It looked exactly like it always did. If somebody had come outside right then, they wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. I tried looking away and then looking back quickly to see if maybe my eyes had tricked me earlier, but it stayed still and ordinary. A few minutes later, maybe 5 or 6, I heard a soft click from the porch. My first thought was that the bulb had finally warmed up enough to turn on again. I leaned forward, watching the fixture. It didn't light up, but something inside it moved. A tiny twitch, like a mechanical part resetting. I waited for a hum, a spark, anything. Nothing came, but that click wasn't the only sound. There was another one behind it, farther away, from the woods beyond my backyard. A dull, short tap, like 2 pieces of wood knocking together. I looked back there even though the trees were too thick and too dark to see anything. The sound didn't repeat. I checked the bulb again. It was still stone cold. The whole situation made my skin tight. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't want to stay out either. I kept trying to convince myself I was making connections where there weren't any. A star brightening weirdly couldn't blow out a porch light. Things don't work like that. Except the timing. The timing wouldn't leave me alone. I took out my phone to use the flashlight function and aimed it at the fixture. The light from the screen flickered once, which it never does, but the phone didn't shut off. I slid my thumb across the screen again, and the flashlight stayed steady. I inspected the wiring, but it looked intact. No scorch marks, no loose pieces. I turned to go inside again and stopped halfway. The sky wasn't completely dark anymore. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. Not light exactly, but more of a faint, elevated haze over the tree line. Almost like far-off headlights reflecting on low clouds, except there were no clouds. The sky had cleared earlier, and the stars were sharp. The haze pulsed once. It didn't brighten so much as thicken, like a breath being held. It lasted a second, and then went back to normal darkness. I felt something in the air when it happened. A small pressure shift, like stepping into an elevator when it first starts to rise. The cicadas started again suddenly, all at once, loud enough to feel like a wave washing back over the neighborhood. The sky went back to looking the way it always did. The haze disappeared. The pressure eased. I sat back down and forced myself to stay still for another 10 minutes, watching and listening for anything else. The porch light stayed dead. The star above the pine didn't move or pulse or shift again. The woods behind my house stayed quiet, except for the usual late summer insects. Eventually, I went inside, locked the door, and left the porch light switch on, hoping it would decide to come back on overnight. It didn't, did it? The next morning, the bulb worked. Not immediately. It flickered twice before finally holding steady. But it lit, just like nothing had happened. I tried to tell myself the star thing was just atmospheric weirdness, or a plane far away catching the sun at the right angle. I even convinced myself of that for a few hours. But that moment, when the sky thickened over the trees, when the porch light died without warming up, when the star seemed to grow and collapse like it was breathing, I keep replaying it. It never feels smaller with time. Every night since, when I sit on that porch, I look at the same star. It hasn't done anything like that again. Not yet. The outage happened halfway through a storm that had blown in faster than anything I'd seen in our part of Ohio. I'd been sitting in my living room with a flashlight balanced on my knee, listening to the wind rattle the siding and watching the trees lean way too far over the yard. The power had already flickered twice, so I wasn't surprised when it finally went. Everything clicked off in this clean, sudden way. No fade, no buzz, just darkness. I remember standing and checking the window, more out of habit than anything else. My house sits just off a two-lane road with only a few other places in sight, and during storms it always feels like the world shrinks down to the glow from your own window. Except now, there wasn't any glow. It was completely black out there. I grabbed my phone, but it was at 9% and going fast, because reception tanks when the weather gets like that. I turned it to airplane mode and set it face down so it wouldn't die on me. The only sound in the house was the wind and the occasional creak of the front porch railing. I was heading toward the kitchen to check on the candles when something outside changed, not loudly, but definitely. The darkness wasn't as dark. It shifted in this strange, gradual way, like when your eyes adjust in a movie theater, but quicker and with no obvious source. For a second, I honestly thought my neighbors had turned on some huge floodlight, but the water-streaked window showed nothing like that. No beam, no visible point of origin, just a deep, muted glow covering everything, like the sky itself was backlit, a weird coppery color almost. I stepped onto the porch, hand on the rail because the boards were slick from the rain blowing in sideways. The air smelled sharp, like metal. The wind had dropped off faster than it should have, like someone had shut it down, and the only sound left was distant thunder behind the hills. The glow got brighter. Not by much, but enough that I could see the wet shine on the road and the silhouettes of the maples at the end of my driveway. It wasn't like normal lightning where everything snaps white. This was steadier and lower, like it came from behind the clouds instead of inside them. My eyes kept trying to adjust, but every time they caught up, the color shifted slightly again. And then I noticed how quiet everything was. No tree branches slapping the roof, no distant hum of generators kicking on at the farms down the road, no rain hitting the gutters. Just this soft, buzzing silence, like when you plug your ears underwater, but can still feel pressure around you. I don't know how long I stood there before checking my watch. The second hand was still moving, but it felt like it was dragging itself along. At some point I realized the glow wasn't staying uniform. There were places where it thickened or rippled, just barely, like waves under ice. I stared at the sky, trying to see if it was just the storm clouds moving, but the shapes didn't line up with the cloud layers. They were broader, slower, too smooth. No edges, nothing you could point at and say, that's a cloud. It reminded me of watching headlights through a frosted bathroom window, diffuse, shapeless, but somehow moving with intention. When the glow peaked, the whole landscape looked unreal. Colors washed out, shadows soft and stretched. My own hand in front of me seemed flatter than it should have, like depth was missing. That's when I heard the hum. It wasn't loud. It was more like a vibration I could feel in my ribs before I heard it in my ears. A low, steady tone with no wobble or echo. It didn't match the storm, didn't match anything mechanical. It just existed, perfectly even. My entire chest felt like someone was resting a palm against it and pushing, not enough to hurt, but enough to feel unnatural. I should have gone inside, but I just stood there listening. My porch light clicked once, just a tiny mechanical clatter inside the fixture, but it didn't turn on. The glow in the sky flickered the same moment the light clicked. Only once, but sharply, like something misfiring. I checked my watch again because I swear I could feel the seconds stretching. I counted in my head, matching the sweep of the hand. When I reached 30, the hum stopped, not faded. Stopped, like a cord being cut. The glow went out the same instant, snapping back to total darkness so fast that I lost my balance for half a second. The normal storm sounds rushed in again. Wind, rain, leaves whipping around the side of the house. Everything sounded louder than before, like my ears had been blocked and suddenly cleared. Then, with this almost theatrical timing, every light inside the house flicked back on at once. Lamps, oven clock, fridge hum, everything. Not flickering, not powering up slowly. Just on. The sudden brightness behind me felt almost aggressive after the darkness. I turned and saw every light glowing like nothing had happened except the digital clocks. They were all reset, blinking 12. Nothing else looked out of place. No branches on the porch. No blown fuses. No scorch marks. Just normal power returning. I went inside and shut the door. The lights seemed too bright and too steady, like they were trying hard to act normal. I kept thinking maybe other people had seen it too, that maybe I'd hear backup generators or see neighbors coming outside. But the houses down the road were dark, except for their porch lights, which clicked on only after the power returned. No one else opened their doors. No one walked out onto the road. Just me, standing there in a washed-out world that had suddenly snapped back to normal. I checked my phone, still at 8%, which wasn't right given how long I'd had it awake earlier. The storm moved off quicker than expected, and by 2 in the morning, the sky had cleared enough to see a few stars through the remaining clouds. Everything smelled normal again. Wet grass, mud, distant wood smoke. I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for some trace of copper light to bleed through the curtains again. Nothing did. The next morning, the local news talked about the outage, but blamed it on a transformer issue 2 towns over. No one mentioned the sky. No one mentioned anything about the 30-second glow. The clocks in my house were all wrong by different amounts when I tried to reset them. My microwave said 7:14, the oven said 7:09. My phone said 7:21. And when I stepped onto the porch to check the weather, the boards still felt cold. Not from the storm, but from something else. Something I couldn't put a name to. I stood there for a while looking up. The sky was washed blue and ordinary, but I kept remembering those soft ripples behind the clouds. The hum in my chest. The way the world paused and then resumed like a switch had been flipped, exactly 30 seconds. I was driving home from my friend Aaron's place in Milton, a little farming town about 20 minutes from where I live in southwest Missouri. It was close to midnight, one of those late summer nights where the heat finally breaks and everything feels washed out and quiet. The gravel roads out there are barely marked, so you basically just follow memory and hope you don't miss a turn. I'd taken that route 100 times, but that night the air felt thicker somehow, like the humidity was sitting inside the truck with me instead of outside. I'd just passed the old red barn that used to belong to the Whitakers. No one lives on that property now. The The barn's still standing, though leaning at one corner like it's tired of being there. I always notice it because it sits alone in a big open patch of field. Usually there's nothing back there except a few rusted out tractors and a line of cottonwoods. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't bright, more like the color of a candle flame if you cupped your hands around it. A soft orange flicker hanging low behind the barn, just over the ground. I saw it for a full second before my brain caught up enough to question what I was looking at. My first thought was that someone was working late and had set up a lantern. People do odd things out here. It wasn't unheard of, but the light didn't bounce off anything. The side of the barn stayed dark. The field stayed dark. Even the grass right under it looked normal. The glow was just suspended there, as if it wasn't touching anything around it. I slowed the truck a little, rolling over the gravel. The sound of the tires felt too loud in that moment. I leaned forward and squinted past the windshield. The glow stayed put, steady and small. It should have dimmed or gotten distorted through the dust and distance, but it stayed the exact same shape. When I got closer, maybe 100 feet away, the light began to rise. Not quickly. Just a slow, smooth vertical lift, totally straight. No wobble, no flicker, no sound. It didn't brighten or spread. It just went up the way a balloon might if someone let go of the string, except it didn't drift sideways at all. I stopped the truck completely. I left the engine running, more because I didn't want to be stranded if something happened than because I planned to get out. The glow rose above the barn's roofline, then kept going until it was high enough that I had to sit up straighter to follow it. The minute it cleared the roof, it picked up speed. Not a burst, just a clean acceleration upward like it had shifted gears. Then it disappeared, not into a cloud, not far away, just gone. The space it had been in looked the same as the rest of the night sky the instant it vanished. I kept staring at the exact spot, waiting for an after image or something, but there was nothing left. I didn't move for a while. The engine idled, rattling faintly against the quiet. The only other sound was the chirping from the field. Crickets, maybe. They'd gone silent when the thing lifted, though I didn't notice at the time. They started again right after it vanished. It took me another minute before I eased the truck forward. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't going to get out and go poking around. I just wanted to get home, but as I rolled past the barn, I felt this pressure in my chest, like the air had changed, heavier or thinner. I can't describe it right. My ears popped slightly, like I'd gone up a hill too fast. I told myself it was nerves. About a quarter mile past the barn, I realized the radio had cut out. It wasn't off, it was just dead silent. The display still showed the station, but no sound came through. I turned the volume dial up and back down. Nothing. I changed the channel. Nothing. I hit the power button and it clicked off, then clicked back on to the same dead silence. The weirdest part was the air. The smell of dust and old hay should have been coming through the vent, but instead I picked up something faintly metallic. Not strong, like blood. More like being near an old metal tank in summer heat. That warm, tinny scent. I rolled the window halfway down. The smell faded, but so did every other smell. No fields, no animals. Just pure neutral air like the inside of a hotel room. When I reached the fork that led to County Road 19, I stopped again. I don't know why. Something about the engine hum felt off. Not broken, just like it was fighting a slight drag. I tapped the gas lightly, and the truck hesitated before responding, almost like it needed an extra second to remember what its job was. I sat there at the fork, staring at the tree line ahead. The night felt too wide, too empty. Then I saw another light. This one wasn't orange, it was white and far smaller, more like a reflection off metal. But it wasn't moving with the wind or anything. It held a fixed position between two distant tree trunks, maybe 8 feet off the ground. It reminded me of when deer catch headlights, except it wasn't shaped like an eye or moving like anything alive. I blinked, and it flickered. Not the way a flashlight flickers, it was more like it shifted now, revealing that its shape wasn't round. It had angles, a slight edge on one side, almost like I wasn't supposed to see it straight on but caught it from the wrong angle. I leaned closer to the windshield. The light dimmed just slightly, as if pulling away. I put the truck in gear and slowly eased forward down the main road, choosing not to take the fork. The light didn't follow. It didn't move at all. It just remained in that gap until the trees blocked my view. The metallic smell came back briefly, then faded again. 2 miles later, the radio crackled back to life so suddenly that I jerked the wheel. It wasn't music or a station. It was just static, low, steady, like an empty channel. I cycled through a few stations until one finally caught, some late-night talk show from Springfield, coming in warped and thin. At least it was something. When I finally turned onto my own road, every porch light on the street was on except mine. It hadn't even occurred to me that I'd left it on earlier in the evening. I pulled into the driveway and stared at the unlit bulb. I tried the switch when I got inside. Nothing. The bulb was fine the next morning. Light popped on first try. A few days later, I asked Aaron if anyone out near Milton had been working in their fields late at night. He said no. Everyone had been dealing with a busted irrigation line, and no one was out past 10. I didn't mention the glow. I just said I thought I'd seen headlights. That orange light has stayed in my mind, though, mostly because of how it rose. No wobble, no spill, no interaction with the world around it. It didn't light up the barn, didn't catch the grass, didn't reflect off my windshield, even when I was close enough for it to. I've driven that road since, once, in daylight. I looked behind the barn. Just the usual old equipment, half swallowed in tall grass. Nothing burned, nothing crushed, nothing disturbed. At night, I take a different route home now. Not because I'm scared exactly, more because I don't want to see that glow again, that quiet, unreachable orange, and have it rise like that as if the world around it doesn't matter. I was walking the loop trail behind my apartment complex in Larkspur, Colorado, the little gravel path that winds through the scrub oak and pines, before circling back toward the parking lot. It was one of those late August evenings where the light hangs around longer than you expect, and the air cools fast once the sun dips behind the ridgeline. I walk that trail almost every day after work, mostly to clear my head. It's quiet and never crowded, even on weekends. I'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was just a calendar reminder I didn't need, but when I glanced at the screen, I noticed I had no signal. Not one bar or SOS only, nothing at all. The little symbol in the corner showed a blank triangle. I hadn't seen that in years. Even on hikes way out of town, I could usually get at least an emergency ping. I stopped in the middle of the trail and held the phone up like that would magically fix it. Still nothing. I turned off the screen and pocketed it again, figuring it was probably just a dead zone. The trail dips into a low area between two hills where reception always gets a little weird. But I'd never lost it completely like that. I kept walking, listening to the gravel crunch under my shoes. The crickets were already out, making that steady background noise that's easy to tune out. The air felt still, not windy or cold, just strangely quiet. I didn't think much of it until I realized I couldn't hear the highway anymore. Usually, even from this far back, you can pick up the faint sound of cars on I-25. I stopped again and tried to listen. Nothing but the crickets. Then they went silent. All at once, like someone flipped a switch. No fading out, no gradual dim, just gone. The kind of silence that makes you hold your breath without thinking. I looked up automatically, even though I didn't know what I expected to see. The sky was that deep blue that comes right before full dark, the first few stars starting to show. I scanned between the tree branches, waiting for something to make sense of that sudden quiet. That's when I heard the hum. It wasn't loud. If anything, it was almost too soft, like it wasn't meant to be heard directly. But I felt it. A slight buzzing through the air, like standing near a transformer. The sound moved overhead, slow and steady, and it didn't match anything I knew. Not a helicopter, not a plane, definitely not a drone. It had no mechanical rhythm, no flutter or chop, just a solid low tone passing from behind me toward the far hill. The weirdest part was the way the hum seemed to bend the silence around it, like sound was reacting to it instead of the other way around. I looked up again, searching for movement, a shadow, anything. But the sky was clear, no clouds, no contrail, just blank blue fading to gray. The hum grew faint, then stopped altogether, and immediately, the second it stopped, my phone buzzed in my pocket again. I pulled it out. Full bars. 5 of them. It even jumped to 5G, which I hardly ever get back there. A notification popped up like nothing had happened. Everything looked completely normal. The crickets didn't come back right away, though. I kept walking, slower this time, glancing over my shoulder more than I wanted to admit. My breathing felt too loud in the quiet. My footsteps felt too sharp. Even the rustle of leaves seemed muted. About a minute later, the crickets all started again at once. Not from one direction. Everywhere, like a wave spreading out. The exact same instant. I just stopped and listened, trying to understand how an entire patch of woods could go silent and come back like that with perfect timing. I checked the sky again. Nothing there. I told myself to keep moving. The trail looped back toward the east side of the complex, where the trees thinned and the lights from the back parking lot spilled across the path. I could see them in the distance, bright and comforting. I'm not someone who scares easy, but something about that silence had reached in deep. About halfway back, my phone vibrated again, but not with a notification. It buzzed like someone was calling, except no call came through. The screen stayed dark. The phone just vibrated in a steady pulse for about 2 seconds, then stopped. I pulled it out, confused. No missed call, no alert. Battery still good, signal still full. Then it happened again. One short buzz like a phantom vibration. I checked every setting, every app. Nothing explained it. I put the phone away and looked around. The trail was empty. The sky had gone darker, a slate blue with stars breaking through. When I turned in a slow circle to look behind me, I saw something that almost didn't register at first. The tops of the pines on the ridge were glowing faintly. It was subtle, like a soft blue-white sheen brushing just the uppermost branches. I thought it might be moonlight, except the moon hadn't risen yet, and the angle didn't make sense. The glow wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from the other side of the hill or above it. It was too diffused to pin down. As soon as I focused on it, the glow dimmed. Not quickly, just as if it was retreating or lowering behind the tree line. It disappeared completely after a few seconds, leaving the tops of the pines in ordinary darkness again. I just stood there, unable to move. My heart was beating harder than the situation deserved, and I kept telling myself it had to be a plane reflecting off the needles or some trick of low light. But none of that fit. Planes don't move soundlessly. Light doesn't fade like it's hiding. I forced myself to keep walking. When I finally reached the section of trail where the apartment buildings came back into view, I felt the air shift, literally shift, like the temperature changed by a few degrees in a single step. Warm to cool, or maybe the other way around. I don't know. It threw me off balance for a second. The moment I stepped under the glow of the parking lot lights, my phone vibrated again. This time it lit up with a notification. No SIM card detected. It stayed that way for maybe half a second before the message vanished and everything returned to normal. SIM detected, signal full, Wi-Fi in range. I stood there staring at my phone, breathing hard and not sure what to do with myself. No one around me seemed to notice anything. A couple was unloading groceries from their car. Someone walked their dog near the corner unit. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. But the trail behind me felt different now. I kept glancing over my shoulder at the edge of the trees, half expecting to see that faint glow again. The next day I tried walking the trail at the same time, just to see if anything felt off. Nothing happened. The phone stayed normal. The crickets stayed loud. The sky stayed quiet. But I don't walk it alone at dusk anymore. I still think about that moment when the hum passed overhead, how it didn't disturb the air, didn't rustle a branch, didn't show itself in any way except that low, steady vibration. How the signal returned the exact second the sound stopped, like they were tied together. I don't know what it was. I just know it moved above me without leaving a trace, and whatever it was, the woods seemed to react to it before I did. I was camping in the Wenatchee National Forest, a little off one of the spur trails that cuts away from the Little Wenatchee River. I'd taken a couple days off work and figured I'd spend them alone in the woods, something I used to do a lot in college, but hadn't made time for in years. It was early October, cold at night, warm enough during the day, and most of the tourists had already packed up for the season. When I pulled into the gravel lot that morning, mine was the only car there. I hiked in maybe 2 miles before picking a spot between a stand of firs, close enough to the river that I could hear the water but not so close that it drowned out everything else. It was one of those clear days where the sky looks washed out and the air feels thinner than usual. I set up my tent, cooked a quick meal on the little stove I brought, and spent most of the afternoon just walking around and taking pictures like some kind of amateur nature photographer. By the time it got dark, the temperature dropped fast. I climbed into my tent with a book and my headlamp. It was one of those quiet nights where you hear every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves, but it's all normal. Small animals, the river shifting past, nothing weird. I don't know how long I'd been reading before I noticed the first thing. A subtle vibration under me, like someone gently tapping the tent stakes from the outside. Just a faint thrum, steady and low. I put my hand flat on the tent floor. It wasn't the ground trembling, it was the tent fabric itself, the poles, the whole structure. Like it was reacting to something, but nothing was touching it. I turned off my headlamp and listened. The woods were still. No wind at all. No branches moving, not even the occasional owl call I'd heard earlier. Just that light vibration passing the tent poles in slow pulses, like a heartbeat. I unzipped the sleeping bag halfway so I could sit up. Every instinct I had told me not to open the door, but sitting there in the dark didn't feel much better. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up bright, showing 9:42 p.m. Full battery. No signal. Not unusual for where I was, but it made me feel more cut off than I expected. The vibration lasted maybe 10 seconds, then eased off like someone turning down a dimmer switch. I waited, listening. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. Then it happened again, stronger this time. The tent poles trembled just enough that I could hear a faint ticking sound where they connected to the frame. Not violent, not shaking, just humming. Like something large was passing overhead, except I didn't hear anything above me. I lay there frozen, staring at the ceiling of my tent as if it might reveal something. The vibration rose for maybe 3 seconds and then a flash. Not bright like lightning. More like a pale wash of white-blue light that filtered through the treetops and down into the clearing. It didn't flicker. It just filled everything for the briefest moment, like the sky had blinked. Instinctively I ducked, though I don't know why. The flash didn't make a sound. No crack, no rumble, just light. Soft, colorless, even. Then darkness again. Complete stillness. No vibration, no animal noise, nothing. I waited for the adrenaline to settle, but it didn't. I unzipped the tent door an inch and peeked out. The trees were perfectly still, silhouettes against the dim starlight. The air didn't move. Even the river, which had been loud all day, sounded quieter than it should have, like it was further away. I widened the opening and shined my headlamp around. The beam caught the trunks of the firs, the ground cover, my pack leaning against the stump where I'd left it. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. But as I swept the light to the right toward the thicker part of the woods, the beam seemed to hit something in the air. Not a solid object, not fog, but a faint shimmer. Like heat distortion above pavement, but it didn't ripple. It held still, then vanished as soon as I focused on it. I pulled back into the tent and zipped the door shut. Not because I thought it would protect me, it was just the only thing I could control. A few minutes passed. I lay down again and forced slow breaths. The tent stayed still, the woods stayed silent. Eventually the normal sounds returned, first the river, then a few insects, like someone slowly turning the world back on. I must have dozed off after that, because the next thing I remember is waking up around midnight with my face pressed against the sleeping bag. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and the tent felt drafty even though the door was zipped tight. I checked my phone again. The screen lit up bright enough to make my eyes ache. 12:03 a.m. Still no signal. I lay there trying to convince myself everything was fine when I noticed something new. A faint scent in the air. Not smoke. Not ozone exactly. Something sharp and metallic, like the smell after pulling adhesive off a new electronics box. It wasn't strong, but it was unfamiliar enough that I sat up again. I turned on my headlamp and swept the beam across the ceiling. Nothing. I checked the zipper and corners of the tent. Everything intact. Then I heard a sound outside. Not footsteps. Not branches breaking. A soft brushing like something moving past the tent at an even, deliberate pace. A whisper of fabric against fabric, except I was alone in a clearing, and nothing should have been that close. I held my breath, listening. The sound circled halfway around the tent before stopping. I waited for it to continue, but it didn't. Silence again. I don't know how long I sat there frozen. 5 minutes? 10? Eventually, the tightness in my chest eased and I realized I was shaking, though not from the cold. The air inside the tent had a lingering charge to it, like the moment before thunder, only without the storm. I made a decision then. I wasn't staying another night. When morning finally came, the sky was pale gray and the air warmer than it had been in the middle of the night. I unzipped the tent, half expecting to see something obvious. Disturbed soil, tracks, broken branches, but the clearing looked completely undisturbed. Except for one thing. The pine needles around the tent were all pointing in the same direction. Not laid flat, not blown, aligned. As if something had pressed them down gently all at once and then lifted. The pattern stretched out in a rough oval around the tent, faint but noticeable once I stepped back and looked at it from a distance. It wasn't the shape of any animal bed or campsite disturbance I'd ever seen. It looked almost like the shadow of something large that had been hovering there, just high enough not to touch anything. I packed up fast, faster than I probably ever have. The whole hike back to the trailhead, I kept glancing up through the branches, expecting to see another flash or hear that vibration start again. But the woods were normal. Birds chirped, squirrels ran across the path. Nothing strange happened. When I got back to my car, I checked my phone again. Full signal. 4 texts from my coworker, all time-stamped around 9:45 p.m. the night before, right when the first vibration hit. I drove out of the forest without stopping. Even now, thinking about that soft hum passing through the tent poles and that pale flash above the canopy, I can't explain it. There was no storm, no aircraft, no wind, nothing that should have made the trees vibrate or the woods fall silent so completely. Whatever it was, it moved through the forest without leaving a mark, except for that faint oval of pressed needles around where I slept. I woke up because the air felt wrong. Not hot, exactly, just too warm for how cold it had been when I went to bed. I sleep with the window cracked even in winter, so usually the room has that sharp, cold bite to it. But when I opened my eyes, the air felt thick and warm like a summer night. For a second, I thought maybe the heat had turned on, but the vent wasn't blowing. The house was silent. No hum from the fridge down the hall, no trucks passing, nothing. I sat up and immediately noticed the light. My room should have been completely dark. I live on a small street in Willow Creek, and the one street lamp near my house burned out months ago. But the whole room had this pale white wash over it, bright enough that I could see the texture in the paint on the wall. I pulled the blanket off and walked to the window. The street outside was glowing. Not like headlights, not like a security light or someone pointing a flashlight. It wasn't coming from any single direction. It was just there. A soft, uniform white glow that filled everything. The pavement, the parked cars, even the air between the houses. I checked the sky first because that seemed like the obvious thing to do. It was totally blank. Not cloudy, not clear. Just a flat, white nothing with no moon, no stars, no movement. I remember leaning closer to the glass like maybe there was frost distorting things, but the window was smooth and warm to the touch. Too warm. I looked up and down the street, expecting someone else to come outside, or at least a dog barking or something, but there was nobody. No silhouettes in windows, no sound of blinds shifting. The entire block looked frozen. The glow didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It just hung there, steady and silent. I opened the window to see if I could hear anything. Warm air rolled in immediately, warmer than my room. And the silence hit even harder. It wasn't the kind of quiet where you just don't hear cars or people. This was like the world had muted itself. No insects, no wind, no hums, no distant highway, no planes overhead. Nothing. Nothing. I whispered hello out of pure instinct. It sounded wrong. My voice came out flat, like it didn't echo off anything. The sound just fell away. I stuck my head out the window and looked toward the intersection. Still no movement. Just that impossible glow. I was about 5 seconds away from going outside to check when something shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was the light itself. Just for an instant, the glow dimmed and brightened again, not like a flicker, but like something passed between me and whatever was lighting everything. An interruption. I froze with my hands on the windowsill. About 20 yards down the street, something moved. At first, I thought it was a person stepping out from behind a car, but the shape was too soft around the edges, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on it. It was tall, but not by a lot, maybe a little taller than the average guy. The outline kept blurring, like a camera struggling to focus in low light, except the street was bright. The shape shifted slightly, leaning or turning. I couldn't tell, but every tiny movement it made sent a ripple through the glow. Very subtle, like dropping a pebble into water. My first stupid thought was that someone had set up some kind of weird light installation, like an art thing. But then the shape drifted, not walked, drifted. It moved sideways without bending its legs. I couldn't even see legs. It just slid. I ducked back immediately, heart pounding like I was a kid hiding from a stranger. I pressed my back to the wall beside the window and tried to breathe quietly. The glow pulsed again. Once, then again, a little stronger. I forced myself to look, just enough to peek out. The shape was closer, maybe 15 yards away now, still drifting, still blurry around the edges. I stepped back from the window, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. The room was filled with that light. If the shape looked directly at the window, it would see me easily. I closed the blinds slowly, trying not to make a sound. The little plastic slats touched each other louder than I wanted, like every click was amplified. When the blinds were down, the glow still filled the room, even brighter now that it had nowhere to escape. I stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do. I felt weirdly exposed, even though I was inside my own house. The walls felt thinner than they should have. After maybe a minute, or maybe 10, I honestly don't know, the warmth in the air intensified. Not painfully hot, but noticeably hotter. I touched my arm and my skin felt flushed, like I'd stood under a heat lamp too long. Then, underneath everything else, I felt vibration. Not in the floor, not the walls, in the air itself. A low, constant tremor that didn't make noise, just pressure, like standing next to massive speakers with no music playing. My teeth almost hurt from it. Something tapped the outside wall. Light. Deliberate. 2 taps, then silence. I held my breath. Another tap, exactly the same spot. I walked toward the wall and pressed my ear against it, even though I was terrified of hearing something. I didn't hear anything, but the vibrations felt strongest there, like they centered on that exact point. The tapping came again, softer this time. I backed away fast. I don't know how long I stayed curled on the far side of the room, but eventually the brightness started to fade. Not suddenly, little by little, like fog thinning out. The warmth faded with it. The vibration weakened until it felt like barely anything. Then it stopped completely. After maybe a minute of total stillness, the usual night sounds returned all at once. A distant dog barking, wind rattling the leaves, a car rolling through the next street over, like someone had unmuted the world. I waited another minute before lifting the blinds. The street was completely normal. Dark, empty, quiet. Just the faint glow from a house a few blocks away. The sky was black and clear, stars visible again. Everything looked exactly the way it should. I checked the sidewalk, the road, the yards. Nothing was out of place. No footprints, no burned patches, no equipment, no lingering fog. I finally worked up the nerve to go outside. The air was cold again, really cold. My breath fogged as soon as I stepped onto the porch. I walked out to the spot where I thought the shape had been, right near the mailbox across the street. The ground was damp from dew, completely undisturbed. I put my hand out, palm open, just to feel the air. Nothing. No warmth. No vibration. But while I stood there listening, I realized something strange. The smell of the air was different. Clean. Too clean. Like the air after a thunderstorm, but without the wind or the rain or the metallic tang. Just a faint, sterile freshness that didn't belong in the middle of a residential street at 3 a.m. It faded within seconds. I went back inside and locked the door, even though I usually don't bother in this neighborhood. When I looked around the room again, everything looked normal, but there was this odd heaviness in the air, like something had just moved through it and hadn't fully settled. I lay awake until sunrise. The next morning, nothing in the house seemed out of place. But when I opened the blinds again, one thing caught my eye. The paint on the outside wall, right where I'd heard the tapping, had a faint circular discoloration. A perfect circle, about the size of a quarter, not burnt, not scraped, just lighter, like the color had been gently pulled out of it. I touched it and it felt completely normal. I've checked it a dozen times since. It hasn't faded or changed. The circle is still there, perfectly even. No one else on the street mentioned anything the next day. Nobody complained about power outages or weird noises or strange lights. Everyone acted like it had been a regular night. I haven't seen the glow again. But sometimes, when the house is really quiet, I'll stop what I'm doing because I feel the faintest warmth in the air, just for a second, and I find myself looking out the window without really knowing why. I was cleaning up after dinner when I first noticed something was off with Daisy. She's a 6-year-old mutt, usually pretty chill, the type who will wander anywhere in the house just to nap in a new spot. But that night, she froze in the doorway of the living room like someone had hit a pause button. Her nails scraped lightly on the hardwood as she shifted her stance, but she wouldn't take a single step inside. Her eyes were locked upward, toward the middle of the ceiling. Not the corners where spiders sometimes hang out. Not the ceiling fan, dead center. I thought maybe she'd spotted a moth or something. I walked past her into the room, expecting she'd follow, but instead she let out this low, shaky growl I'd never heard from her before. Not defensive, more like she was warning me. I looked up, but I didn't see anything. The living room lights were on, just the normal warm bulbs. Nothing flickering, nothing weird. The ceiling looked exactly like it always did. White paint, a few faint roller marks from when I redid it last year, nothing else. "Daisy, come on," I said, patting my leg. She didn't move. Her ears were pinned back and her tail was stiff and low. I tried coaxing her again, but she started backing up slowly, step by step, like she was trying to keep an eye on the ceiling while also putting distance between herself and the room. I grabbed my phone, opened the flashlight, and shined it across the ceiling. Still nothing. No insect, no shadow, no crack. I even moved the coffee table so I could stand directly underneath and look straight up. Nothing unusual. Eventually I gave up and went back to the kitchen. Daisy stayed planted in the hallway, still staring, but not growling anymore. Just tense. I figured I'd check it again later. Dogs get weird about things sometimes. But about 20 minutes after that, while I was rinsing dishes, I heard this strange clicking sound from the living room. Not loud, more like a soft tapping. Irregular, almost like someone gently flicking a fingernail against glass. Except there's no glass on the ceiling. I dried my hands and walked back toward the room. Daisy was still there, still watching. When she saw me approach, she whined once, this unsteady little sound she only makes when she wants me to stop doing something. I stepped inside anyway. The clicking stopped instantly. I waited. Nothing. I walked in further, checking around. Vents, lamp cords, the TV wall mount. No idea what could have made that sound. I even stood with my ear tilted up, trying to hear anything at all. All I got was the faint hum of the fridge in the next room. I sighed and turned around to head back. That's when Daisy let out a sharp bark, one single warning bark, and my heart jumped. I spun around and looked up. There, across the ceiling, about 2 feet wide and right where she'd been staring all night, a faint shimmer passed. Not bright, not like a reflection from a phone or a car outside. More like a ripple of slightly darker air, like the ceiling had briefly turned into the surface of a pond touched by a breeze. It pulsed once, a soft, wave-like distortion, then vanished. Gone so fast, I wasn't even sure I'd seen it. The ceiling was just white again. I walked underneath it, slow, like I'd scare it somehow. I put my hand up to the spot, just smooth paint. No change in temperature, nothing weird. Daisy wouldn't even look away. She was still fixed on the ceiling like she was tracking something I couldn't see. I tried turning off the lights and then switching them back on. No change. I stood on a chair and ran my hand across the drywall, tapping, pressing, completely normal. I told myself maybe headlights from a car at the intersection a block over had bounced weirdly through the window, except the blinds were already half closed and it hadn't looked like light, more like displacement, like the air itself had moved. About an hour later, I was lying on the couch with the TV on low when I heard the clicking again. Same soft, irregular tapping. I muted the TV. It kept going for a few seconds, then stopped. Daisy was lying against my leg by then. She finally came into the room once I sat down, but she still kept glancing upward every now and then, ears tilting with each little noise. At one point, she sat up abruptly and stared at the exact same spot as before. She didn't growl this time, just watched with this tight, serious focus she usually saves for squirrels or strangers at the door. I turned the TV off completely and listened. The house felt too quiet. Not just regular nighttime quiet, but the kind where you notice what's missing. I couldn't hear the fridge hum anymore, or the heater, or the faint electrical buzz from the lamp. Everything felt muffled, like someone had stuffed insulation into the walls. I stood up slowly. Daisy stood too. I looked at the ceiling again, also slowly, almost afraid I'd see something. For a moment, maybe half a second, I caught just the slightest ripple, barely visible, like heat rising off asphalt, except horizontal. I blinked, and it was gone. I backed up until my legs hit the couch. I sat down. Daisy immediately pressed against me, the way she does during thunderstorms. The weird silence lifted all at once. The fridge clicked back on. The heater made its usual thump. Everything normalized like someone had flipped a switch. It didn't occur to me until later how strange the timing was. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started drifting off, Daisy would sit up and stare at the ceiling again, sometimes for minutes at a time. Eventually, she curled up against my chest, which she never does except when she's scared. I kept one hand on her and stared up too, even though there was nothing to see except the usual faint shadows from the street lamp outside. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft whirring sound. Not mechanical, more like distant wind chimes, but without the metallic tones. Just soft, steady movement. I checked the window. There was no breeze. The trees weren't moving. Everything outside was still. The sound wasn't outside anyway. It seemed to be coming from above the ceiling, somewhere in the space between the drywall and the attic. I went up to the attic with a flashlight, stepping carefully on the boards so I wouldn't fall through. It was freezing up there, breath turning to little clouds. I checked around for animals, for drafts, for anything. The insulation was undisturbed. No droppings, no movement, no sign of mice or raccoons. But in the exact spot above the living room ceiling, the air felt just a touch warmer. Not warm enough to be a heater duct. I checked for those, just not as cold as the rest of the attic. I stayed there longer than I should have, shining my flashlight around, waiting for any movement or sound. Nothing happened. Eventually, the air cooled to match the rest of the attic, and when I pressed my hand to the insulation, it felt normal. When I went back downstairs, Daisy was waiting at the bottom step, tail low, ears perked. She sniffed me like I'd been somewhere unfamiliar. I slept on the couch with the lights on and the TV playing quietly just to keep the room feeling normal. In the morning, the ceiling looked completely ordinary. Daisy walked through the living room like nothing had happened. She even wagged her tail and grabbed her toy, like the whole night had reset for her. But later, when I stood under that spot and looked up, I swear I could see the faintest difference in the paint texture, a slightly smoother circular area, maybe 2 feet across. If I hadn't known exactly where to look, I wouldn't have noticed anything at all. I haven't seen the shimmer again, not the same way. But every now and then, usually at night when the house settles and the lights are low, Daisy will stop whatever she's doing and stare up at the ceiling like she's listening to something moving that only she can hear. I was out on Cedar Hollow Lake before sunrise, the way I usually am whenever I can't sleep. The place is quiet in a way I don't get anywhere else. No traffic, no people yelling, just the soft slap of water against the hull. I've been fishing there since high school, and even now, in my 30s, I still go alone most mornings before work. That morning, though, everything felt off as soon as I cut the motor. The air was colder than it should have been for late July. Not normal cold lake air cold. This was a sharp, dry cold that made the hair on my arms stand up. The sky was still pitch dark except for a faint blue line on the horizon, not enough to see by, so I had my small lantern clipped to the side of my seat. I dropped anchor in my usual spot near the East Cove. The water was smooth, even calmer than usual. Too calm. No insects skimming the surface, no distant splash of a carp jumping. It was like the lake was holding its breath. I cast once, let the line settle, and sat back, trying to shake the weird feeling. I remember checking the time on my phone, 4:48 a.m., and then putting it away because the battery was lower than it should have been. I hadn't even used it that morning, but it was already at 30%. I figured maybe it hadn't charged right. A few minutes passed with nothing. No bites, no movement. The stillness was getting to me, so I turned the lantern down a little, hoping the dimmer light would let me see the first hints of dawn hitting the water. That's when I heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More like a shift, like the air pressure changed around me. My ears popped slightly, like I'd climbed too fast in an airplane. The lantern flickered once, just a quick dip in brightness. I grabbed the sides of the boat, thinking maybe I'd drifted and the anchor rope had snagged on something, but the boat wasn't moving. The water still looked completely flat. Then I saw the ripples. At first, it was so subtle I thought my eyes were messing with me. A gentle ring spreading out from the front of the boat. Not from a fish or anything breaking the surface. It was too smooth for that. It was like someone dropped a pebble perfectly straight down into the lake, inches from my bow. Except nothing had touched the water. The circle spread, widening, perfect in shape. Then another formed inside it, and another, slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Each one originating from the exact same point, right in front of the boat. I leaned forward, squinting at the water. The lantern's light barely reached that far, but I could see just enough to make out a faint distortion under the surface. Not movement, just brightness. The kind of brightness you see when someone shines a flashlight through a thick layer of ice. Soft, blurred edges. The ripples kept forming, slower now, but stronger. The boat rocked gently, like something deep underneath was pushing water up in slow pulses. I thought about pulling the anchor and backing away, but something about the whole thing felt like moving would make it worse. I just gripped the sides of the boat and tried to stay steady. The light below the surface grew brighter. Not fast, just a steady increase, like someone slowly turning a dimmer switch. It had a bluish tint, pale and cold looking, and it made the water around it seem almost clear. I found myself leaning forward again without even realizing it. The brightness grew until I could see the silhouette of the anchor rope drifting in it. The rope seemed to glow around the edges, like the light was bending around it. I'd never seen anything underwater glow like that. My first thought was phosphorescence, like plankton or algae, but this was too focused, too controlled, and it wasn't moving with the current. It was staying perfectly centered right beneath the bow. The ripples stopped suddenly. One moment they were spreading, and the next the water went completely flat, so smooth it looked like glass. The light stayed steady and bright. I held my breath without meaning to. Then, just for a second, something passed between the light and the surface. A shadow. Not a clear shape, not something I could describe, but something with depth. Something that shouldn't have been that close to the surface without breaking it. The shadow drifted sideways and vanished. The light flared a little brighter. Then it went out. Not faded, not dimmed. It cut out instantly, like someone flipped a switch. The darkness hit so fast I nearly fell backward. My lantern flickered again, and for a moment I thought it was going to go out too. I unhooked it and held it up over the side, trying to see into the water, but there was nothing. Just black lake stretching out in every direction. Perfectly calm, no ripples, no disturbance. The anchor rope hung straight down, unmoving. Whatever had been underneath the boat had left no trace at all. I waited, listening, but the lake was completely silent again. I started pulling up the anchor. I wasn't going to stay there any longer. The rope felt normal in my hands, rough and cold and wet, but when I reached the anchor itself, the metal was warm. Not warm from friction or sunlight. It was warm in a way that made no sense, like it had been sitting near a heater. I dropped it onto the deck and just stared at it for a minute. The sky was lightening around the edges now, and the faintest bit of real color was hitting the water. I started the motor and headed back toward the dock, keeping my eyes on the lake around me the whole time. Nothing else happened on the ride back. No more ripples. No light. Just the normal sound of the motor and the faint breeze that should have been there all along. When I reached the dock, I tied up the boat and stood there for a while, watching the water. The first birds of the morning were starting to chirp, and it was like someone had pressed play on the world again. I checked the anchor once more. Still warm. By the time I loaded the boat onto the trailer and drove home, it had cooled off like nothing was ever strange about it. I went back to Cedar Hollow the next morning, mostly to see if anything felt different. The lake was normal, busy with insects, fish jumping, all of it. But there was one thing I noticed the second I cut the motor and drifted near the East Cove. The water there was colder. Not freezing, but noticeably colder than the rest of the lake. When I let my hand hang over the side, I could feel the temperature shift like I'd reached into a spring. I moved around with the boat for a while, checking other spots out of curiosity. Everywhere else felt normal. Only that one spot, the exact place the light had been, felt wrong. I haven't fished in that spot since. I still go out on the lake all the time, but I stay closer to the west end now. And every time I catch myself drifting near the cove, I correct course without even deciding to. The lake looks the same. Sounds the same. But I can't shake the feeling that something down there was watching me long before the light ever appeared. I stepped outside to take out the trash a little after 11. It was a Tuesday, nothing special about it. And I remember that because I'd just finished cleaning up after dinner and arguing with myself about whether I was going to shower before bed or just collapse on the couch. My neighborhood in Elk Ridge is usually quiet at that time. A couple porch lights, a TV flickering behind a curtain somewhere, that kind of thing. I was carrying the trash bag across the driveway when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was just a plane coming in low. We're not that far from a regional airport, and sometimes you'll see landing lights drifting over the rooftops. But this one wasn't moving. It hung there between my house and the Harrison's place across the fence, dead still. Bright enough that it stood out even with the street lamp nearby, but not blinding, like a star, except much too close. I stopped halfway down the driveway, the trash bag dangling from my hand. The light hovered maybe 20 or 30 feet above the gap between the two backyards. Too low for anything commercial, too bright for a drone, and it didn't bob or sway, which drones always do. For a second, I honestly thought it might be someone's weird new security thing. A floating light, maybe on a tether? It sounds ridiculous now, but that was the first explanation my brain tried to offer. Then it flickered, not like a bulb going out. It pulsed once, a quick, sharp dimming, then back to full brightness. It reminded me of a camera flash reflecting off something metallic. I waited for a sound, a motor, a rotor, anything. Nothing. The whole yard felt unnaturally quiet. Even the crickets had stopped. I didn't realize that until later, but the silence was so total it made my ears ring. I set the trash bag down at my feet without meaning to. Some instinct made me step backward toward the house. The air felt different, cooler, but also thick, like the humidity had jumped in the last few seconds. The light flared again, softer this time, and I could see the outline of something around it, not a clean shape. More like the light was trapped inside a foggy bubble. I kept blinking, trying to clear my eyes, but it stayed the same. I thought about calling someone, my neighbor, maybe, or even 911 just to ask if anyone else had reported strange lights. But my phone was inside. Every part of me told me not to turn my back on it long enough to go get it. I took another step back, and that's when the light shot upward. No buildup, no acceleration curve. One moment it was hovering between the houses, and the next it streaked straight up into the clouds. A perfectly vertical line, so fast it didn't leave a trail. Just gone. The clouds above lit up for a split second, a circular glow like the light had hit the underside of the cloud layer, and then everything went totally dark again. I was standing there with my hand on the porch railing, breathing too fast. It didn't feel real. The whole sky looked normal again, maybe a little overcast, but nothing unusual. Then the street lamp flickered, just once, a tiny hiccup of dimness. And the motion sensor floodlight over the Harrison's garage blinked on, even though nothing was moving over there. The crickets started up again, loud enough to jolt me. I picked up the trash bag, tossed it into the bin, and walked back inside without looking up. My hands were shaking. I didn't even realize how badly until I tried to lock the door and the deadbolt rattled. Inside, the house felt different. Stuffy, almost stale. I checked the thermostat because the air felt weirdly warm, but it was set the same as always. When I looked toward the windows facing the backyard, everything seemed normal. No lights, no movement, nothing. I went to make sure the back door was locked and stopped in the kitchen. The microwave clock was blinking 12, the oven too. The digital thermostat display had reset to its default screen, not off, just like it had restarted, but the power hadn't gone out. The living room lamp was still on, my laptop was still running. Nothing else had so much as flickered, just the devices with clocks. I checked my phone next. It was sitting on the counter where I'd left it, screen dark. When I pressed the button, it lit up, but the time was completely wrong. It showed 3:17 a.m. I looked at the actual time on the wall clock, 11:08 p.m. I tried to reset the phone manually, but the moment I opened the settings, the time corrected itself automatically to 11:08. I watched it tick to 11:09, like nothing strange had happened. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, 30 minutes maybe. Windows locked, lights on, just listening, waiting for something else to happen, even though I didn't want it to. I kept thinking about the way the light moved, straight up, not arcing like a flare or drifting like a drone, more like it had been yanked away. After a while, I worked up the nerve to look out the back window. The yard was dark and still. The Harrison security light had turned off again. Nothing looked disturbed. No scorch marks, no broken branches, no footprints. Just my normal, boring backyard. I told myself it must have been some kind of aircraft, a weather balloon, a drone someone modified, anything normal. But every time I replayed it in my head, the same details stuck out. The silence, the pulse of the light, the cloud glow, the clocks resetting. I went back outside the next morning just to check. The grass looked normal, trash bin where I'd left it, no sign of anything. But right where the light had hovered, in that exact spot, the air still felt colder. Not by much, but enough that I noticed it immediately. I even stood there with my hands out to test it. A cool patch, maybe a foot across, hovering at chest height. It faded after a few seconds, or maybe I moved too much and lost whatever it was. I haven't seen anything like it since. Sometimes I take the trash out earlier now, while it's still light, and on nights when I forget and have to do it late, I find myself glancing toward that space between the houses before I open the door, just in case something's there again. I saw the kid on the side of County Road 18 just after 11. It was one of those muggy late August nights where the sky is clear but the air feels thick, and the only lights are your headlights and whatever stars manage to punch through the haze. I'd been driving home from my brother's place in Freeport, taking the back roads because I liked the quiet. Hardly anyone uses that stretch at night except farmers and the occasional long hauler cutting through. I spotted the kid because he wasn't moving, just standing at the edge of the cornfield, right where the gravel shoulder meets the asphalt. A small figure, maybe 10 or 11, arms hanging loose, head tilted down like he was staring at his shoes. No backpack, no flashlight, no bike. Nothing. I slowed immediately. It wasn't even a decision, just reflex. A kid alone that late in the middle of nowhere didn't make sense. I rolled to a stop a few yards ahead and threw my hazards on. The blinking amber lights lit up the road behind me, and the corn on either side shifted slightly in the breeze. I got out of the car, keeping my hands visible so I didn't come off as threatening. The night air hit me warm and damp. "Hey," I called out. "You all right? You hurt?" The kid didn't answer, didn't turn his head, didn't show any sign he'd heard me. I took a few steps closer, the gravel crunching under my shoes. "Are you lost? Do you need a ride? I can call someone, your parents, the sheriff, whoever." Still nothing. I got close enough to see that he was wearing a thin gray t-shirt and shorts, not dressed for how sticky the air was, as if he didn't feel it. His arms were pale in the headlights. I crouched a little to try to get on his eye level. "Hey, buddy. Look, I can help you. You just need to tell me what's going on." His head shifted slightly, but not enough to look at me. And then he spoke. "Don't stay on this road soon." His voice was quiet and flat. No fear, no urgency, just a steady line of sound that didn't match the weirdness of the statement. "What do you mean?" I asked. "What's going to happen?" He didn't reply. Didn't move. I checked the sky out of instinct. Perfectly clear. No storms, no clouds, just darkness and stars. I glanced back at my car, thinking maybe I should call 911. When I looked at the kid again, he'd stepped a few inches closer to the cornfield, like he was dry-fitting toward it. I hadn't seen him move. It was like the distance between us had changed on its own. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you don't want help, that's fine, but you can't stay out here alone. There's nothing around for miles." The kid finally reacted, but not to what I said. He lifted one hand and pressed his palm gently against his own thigh, like he was grounding himself, and repeated, "Don't stay on this road soon." "Soon when?" I asked. "Next hour? Next minute?" That's when I felt the vibration. Not through the ground at first, through the air. A subtle buzzing in my chest. The same feeling you get standing too close to heavy machinery, except there was nothing around us but corn and empty road. I held my breath and listened. The asphalt trembled under my shoes. A low, deep vibration ran along the road like something enormous was passing overhead, except the sky was silent and still. No wind, no aircraft lights, nothing visible. The kid didn't react at all, like he expected it. The vibration grew stronger, enough that I had to widen my stance to keep my balance. It didn't rattle like an earthquake, more like a heavy engine idling right above us, but completely silent. My teeth buzzed. I looked up again, desperate to see something that explained it. Still nothing. Just stars. I took a step back. "Okay, we need to go. Come on, come with me." The vibration stopped. Instantly. Like a switch flipped. The night returned to its normal thickness, crickets starting back up in a scattered chorus like they were confused. The kid finally lifted his chin. Slowly. Too slowly. When his face came into the full wash of my headlights, I saw his eyes. Black, not dark brown. Solid black. No whites, no shine. Just flat voids staring straight at me like they weren't reflecting the light at all. I stumbled back one more step, my heel catching on the gravel. Jesus. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just watched me, expression blank. Then he said as calmly as before, "It isn't safe here." I swallowed hard. "Okay," I said, "then let's leave." He turned away, not with his feet at first, but with his head, rotating toward the cornfield like he'd heard something call to him. His body followed a heartbeat later, stiff and strange, like he had to remind himself how walking worked. Then he stepped into the corn, not around it, not pushing it aside, just straight into it. The tall stalks parted with this soft, whispering sound, hardly moving even as he disappeared between them. I ran forward without thinking. "Hey, wait, come back!" But by the time I reached the edge of the field, the stalks were settling, swaying like someone had walked through. But I couldn't see him. The rows were too dense, too tall, and there was no flashlight strong enough to cut through that kind of darkness. "Kid," I yelled, "come back! It's dangerous in there." Silence. Then, somewhere deep in the field, something rustled. Light, quick movement. Could have been a raccoon. Could have been something following him. It didn't repeat. I backed away slowly. When I got to my car, I checked the time out of habit, 11:32. I'd left my brother's place at 10:50. The drive home should have been 20 minutes, but it felt like more time had passed. I drove the last few miles home, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers went numb. The whole way, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the kid standing on the shoulder behind me. Nothing followed me, but the odd buzzing sensation lingered in my chest all night, fading only after I finally crashed on the couch around 4. The next morning, I drove back down County Road 18. The spot where I'd stopped looked normal. No footprints except my own. No bent stalks at the edge of the corn. No sign anyone had been there. I walked along the shoulder anyway, kicking at gravel, hoping for something, anything that would prove the kid wasn't just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the road was quiet, the sky clear, and somewhere across the cornfield, something let out a long, low creaking sound. Not wind, not an animal, more like metal cooling after being heated. I didn't check it out. I got back in my car and left. I don't take County Road 18 at night anymore. It's not a fear thing. It's more like the kid gave me a warning, and even if it made no sense, I listened. And sometimes when I'm out late and the sky is too quiet, I still feel that vibration in my chest, just for a second, like something huge is passing unseen overhead.